Section 7 of the Perfumed Garden by Sheikh NEFZAOUI. Translated by Richard Burton. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Alia, Makki. Chapter 9. The sundry names given to the sexual organs of women. Al-Farj, the slit. Abu Bal'oom, the glutton. Al-Kus, the vulva. Al-Muqa'war, the bottomless. Al-Qalmoon, the voluptuous. Abu Shafarain, the two-lipped. Al-As, the primitive. Abu Angara, the humpbacked. Al-Zarzur, the starling. Al-Ghurbal, the sieve. Al-Shaq, the chin. Al-Hazzaz, the restless. Abu Tartur, the one with a crest. Al-Lazzaz, the unionist. Abu Khushaym, the one with a little nose. Al-Mud, the accommodating. Al-Mu'in, the assistant. Al-Qunfudh, the hedgehog. Al-Masbul, the long one. Al-Sakuti, the silent one. Al-Malqi, the duelist. Al-Daqqaq, the crusher. Al-Harrab, the fugitive. Al-Thaqil, the importunate. Al-Sabir, the resigned. Al-Talib, the yearning one. Al-Musaffah, the barred one. Al-Hasan, the beautiful. Al-Mazur, the deep one. Al-Naffakh, the one that swells. Al-Addad, the biter. Abu Jabha, the one with a projection. Al-Massas, the sucker. Al-Zambur, the wasp. Al-Wasa', the vast one. Al-Har, the hot one. Al-Arid, the large one. Al-Ladhid, the delicious one. As regards to the vulva called Al-Farj, or the slit, it has this name because it opens and shuts again when hotly yearning for coitus, like the one of a mare in heat at the approach of the stallion. This word, however, is applied indiscriminately to the natural parts of men and women, for God the Supreme had used this expression in the Quran, chapter 33, volume 35. Al-Hafidhina furujahum wal-Hafidhat. The proper meaning of farj is slit, opening, or passage. People say, I have found a farj in the mountains, viz. a passage. There is a sukoon upon the ra and a fatha upon the jim, and in this sense it means also the natural parts of woman. But if the ra is marked with a fatha, it signifies deliverance from misfortunes. The person who dreams of having seen the vulva or the farj of a woman will know that if he is in trouble, God will free him of it. If he is in perplexity, he will soon get out of it. And lastly, if he is in poverty, he will soon become wealthy, because farj, by transposing the vowels, will mean the deliverance from evil. By analogy, if he wants a thing, he will get it. If he has debts, they will be paid. It is considered more lucky to dream of the vulva as open, but if the one seen belongs to a young virgin, it indicates that the door of consolation will remain closed, and the thing which is desired is not obtainable. It is a proved fact that the man who sees in his dream the vulva of a virgin that has never been touched will certainly be involved in difficulties, and will not be lucky in his affairs. But if the vulva is open so that he can look well into it, or even it is hidden but he is free to enter it, he will bring the most difficult tasks to a successful end after having first failed in them, and this after a short delay, by the help of a person whom he never thought of. He who has seen in his dream a man busy upon a young girl, and when the same is getting off her has managed to see at that moment her vulva, will bring his business to a happy end, after having failed to do so, by the help of the man he has seen. If it is himself who did the girl's business, and he has seen her vulva, he will succeed by his own exertion to realize the most difficult problems, and be successful in every respect. Generally speaking, to see the vulva in dreams is a good sign, so it is of good augury to dream of coition, and he who sees himself in the act, and finishing with the ejaculation, will meet success in all his affairs. But it is not the same with a man who merely begins coition and does not finish it. He, on the contrary, will be unlucky in every enterprise. It is supposed that the man who dreams of being busy with a woman will afterwards obtain from her what he wants. The man who dreams of cohabiting with women with whom to have sexual intercourse is forbidden by religion, for instance his mother, his sister, etc., or the maharim, must consider this as a presage that he will go to sacred places, al-haram, and perhaps even journey to the holy house of God, and look there upon the grave of the Prophet. As regards to the virile member, it has been previously mentioned that to dream of accident occurring to that organ means the loss of all remembrance and the extinction of the race. The sight of a pair of pantaloons or sirwal prognosticates the appointment to a post or a wilaya, by reason of the analogy of the letters composing the word sirwal with those arming by transposition the two words sir, or go, and wali, named go to the post for which you are named. It is related that a man who had dreamed that the Emir had given him a pair of pantaloons became Qadi. Dreaming of pantaloons is also a sign of protection for the natural parts, and foretells success in business. The almond, or lawz, a word composed of the same letters as zal, or to seize, seen in a dream by a man in trouble, means that he will be liberated from it; to a man who is ill, that he will be cured. In short, all misfortunes will give way. Somebody having dreamed that he was eating almonds asked the wise man the meaning of it. He received the answer that by reason of the analogy of the letters in lawz and zal, the ills that beset him would disappear, and the event justified the explanation. The sight of a molar tooth, or dars, in a dream indicates eternity. The man, therefore, who has seen his tooth drop out, may be sure that his enemy is dead. This arises from the word dars, signifying both enemy and a molar, and one can say at the same time, it is my tooth and it is my enemy. The window, or taga, and the shoe, or the madas, reminds you of women. The vulva resembles, in fact, when invaded by the verge, a window with a man putting his head into it to look about, or a shoe that is being put on. Consequently, he who sees himself in dreaming in the act of going in at a window or putting on a shoe has the certainty of getting possession of a young woman or a virgin if the window is newly built, or the shoe is new and in good condition, but that woman will be old according to the state of the window or shoe. The loss of a shoe foretells to a man the loss of his wife. To dream of something folded together, and which gets open, predicts that a secret will be divulged and made public. The same remaining folded up indicates, on the other hand, that the secret will be kept. If you dream of reading a letter, you will know that you will have news, which will be, according to the nature of the contents of the letter, good or bad. The man who dreams of passages in the Quran or the traditions of Hadith will, from the subjects treated therein, draw his conclusion. For instance, the passage, "He will grant you the help of God and immediate victory," will signify to him victory and triumph. "Certainly God has the decision in his hands," or "Heaven will open and offer its numerous portals," and other similar passages indicate success. A passage treating of punishment prognosticates punishment. From those treating of benefits, a lucky event may be concluded. Such is the passage in the Quran which says, "He who forgives sins is terrible in his inflictions." Dreams about poetry and songs contain their explanation in the contents of the objects of the dream. He who dreams of horses, mules, or asses may hope for good, for the Prophet, God's salutation and goodness be with him, has said, "Men's fortunes are attached to the forelocks of their horses till the day of resurrection." And it is written in the Quran, "God the Highest has thus willed it that they serve you for mounts and for state." The correctness of these prognostications is not subject to any doubt. He who dreams of seeing himself mounted upon an ass as a career, and arriving at his destination, will be lucky in all things. But he who tumbles off the ass on his way is advised that he will be subject to accidents and misfortunes. The fall of a turban from the head predicts ignominy, as the turban being the Arab's crown. If you see yourself in a dream with naked feet, it means loss, and the bare head has the same significance. By transposing the letters, other analogies may be arrived at. These explanations are not here in their place, but I have been induced to give them in this chapter on account of the use of which they may be put. Persons who wish to know more on this subject have only to consult the treatise of Ibn Sirin. I now return to the names given to the sexual parts of woman. Al-Kus, or the vulva. This word serves as the name of a young woman's vulva in particular. Such a vulva is very plump and round in every direction, with long lips and grand slit, the edges well divided and symmetrical and rounded. It is soft, seductive, perfect throughout. It is the most pleasant and no doubt the best of all the different sorts. May God grant us the possession of such a vulva. Amen. It is warm, tight, and dry, so much that one might expect to see fire burst from it. Its form is graceful, its odour pleasant. The whiteness of its outside sets off its carmine red middle. There is no imperfection about it. Al-Qalmun, the voluptuous, the name given to the vulva of a young virgin. Al-As, or the primitive, this is a name applicable to every kind of vulva. Al-Zarzur, the starling, the vulva of a very young girl, or as others pretend, of a brunette. Al-Shaq, or the chink, the vulva of a bony, lean woman. It is like a chink in a wall, with not a vestige of flesh. May God keep us from it. Abu Tartur, or the crested one. It is the name given to a vulva furnished with a red comb like that of a cock, which rises at the moment of enjoyment. Abu Khushaym, the snub nose, is a vulva with thin lips and small tongue. Al-Qunfudh, the hedgehog, the vulva of the old, decrepit woman, dried up with age and with bristly hair. As-Sakuti, the silent one. This name has been given to the vulva that is noiseless. The member may enter 100 times a day, but will not say a word, and will be content to look on without a murmur. Ad-Daqqaq, the crusher, so called from its crushing movements upon the member. It generally begins to push the member, directly it enters, to the right and to the left, and to grip it with a matrix, and would, if it could, absorb also the two testicles. Al-Thaqil, the importunate. This is the vulva which is never tired of taking in the member. This latter might pass 100 nights with it, and walk in 100 times every night. Still that vulva would not be sated, nay, it would still want more, and it would not allow the member to come out again at all if it was possible. With such a vulva the parts are exchanged. The vulva is the pursuer, the member is pursued. Luckily it is a rarity, and only found in a small number of women, who are wild with passion, all on fire and in flame. Al-Talib, the yearning one. This vagina is met with in a few women only. With some it is natural, with others it becomes what it is by long abstinence. It is burning for a member, and having got one in its embraces, it refuses to part with it until its fire is completely extinguished. Al-Hasan, the beautiful. This is the vulva which is white, plump, in form vaulted like a dome, firm and without any deformity. You cannot take your eyes off it, and to look at it changes a feeble erection into a strong one. Al-Naffakh, the swelling one, so called because a torpid member coming near it and rubbing its head against it a few times, at once swells and stands upright. To the woman who has such a one it procures excessive pleasure, for at the moment of crisis it opens and shuts convulsively, like the vulva of a mare. Abu Jabha, the one with a projection. Some women have this sort of vulva, which is very large, with a pubis prominent like a projecting fleshy forehead. Al-Wasa', the vast one, a vulva surrounded by very large pubis. Women of that build are said to be of large vagina, because although on the approach of the member it appears fine and penetrable to such a degree that not even a marud seems likely to be passed in, as soon as it feels the friction of the glands against its center, it opens wide at once. Al-Arid, the large one. This is the vulva which is as wide as it is long, that is to say, fully developed all round, from side to side, and from pubis to the perineum. It is the most beautiful to look upon, as the poet said. It has the splendid whiteness of a forehead. In its dimensions it is like the moon. The fire that radiates from it is like the sun's, and seems to burn the member which approaches. Unless first moistened with saliva, the member cannot enter. The odour it emits is full of charms. It is also said that this name applies to the vagina of women who are plump and fat. When such a one crosses her thighs one over the other, the vulva stands out like the head of a calf. If she lays it bare, it resembles a sa' of corn placed between her thighs, and if she walks, it is apparent under her clothes by its wary movement at each step. May God in His goodness and generosity let us enjoy such a vagina. It is of all the most pleasing, the most celebrated, the most wished for. Abu Bal'um, the glutton, the vulva with a vast capacity for swallowing. If such a vulva has not been able to get coitus for some time, it fairly engulfs the member that then comes near it, without leaving any trace of it outside, like as a man who is famished flings himself upon viands that are offered to him, and would swallow them without mastication. Al-Muqawwar, the bottomless. This is the vagina of indefinite length, having in consequence the matrix lying very far back. It requires a member of the largest dimensions. Any other could not succeed in arousing its amorous sensibilities. Abu Shafarain, the two-lipped. This name is given to the amply developed vagina of an excessively stout woman. Also to vaginas, the lips of which have become flaccid owing to weakness, and are long and pendulous. Abu Angara, the humpbacked. This vulva has the mount of Venus prominent and hard, standing out like a hump on the back of the camel, and reaching down between the thighs like the head of a calf. May God let us enjoy such a vulva. Amen. Al-Ghurbal, or the sieve. This vulva, on receiving a member, seems to sift it all over, below, right and left, fore and aft, until the torment of pleasure arrives. Al-Hazzaz, or the restless. When this vagina has received the member, it begins to move violently and without interruption until the member touches the matrix, and then knows no repose till it has hastened on the enjoyment and finished its world. Al-Lazzaz, the unionist. The vagina which, having taken in the member, clings to it and pushes itself forward upon it so closely that if the thing were possible it would enfold the two testicles. Al-Mud, the accommodating. This name is applied to the vagina of a woman who has felt for a long time an ardent wish for coition. In rapture with the member it sees, it is glad to second its movements of come and go. It offers its matrix to the member by pressing it forward within reach, which is, after all, the best gift it can offer. Whatever place inside of it the member wants to explore, this vulva will make him welcome to, gracefully according to its wish. There is no corner it will not help the member to reach. Al-Masbul, the long one. This name applies only to some vulvas. Everyone knows that vulvas are far from being all the same in conformation and aspect. This vulva extends from the pubis to the anus. It lengthens out when the woman is lying down or standing, and contracts when she is sitting, differing in this respect from the vulva of a round shape. It looks like a splendid cucumber lying between the thighs. With some women it shows projecting under light clothing, or when they are bending back. Al-Mulki, the dualist. This vulva which, on the introduction of a member, executes the movement of coming and going, pushes itself upon it for fear of its retiring before the pleasure arrives. There is no enjoyment for it but the shock given to its matrix by the member, and it is for this that it projects its matrix to grip and suck the member's gland when the ejaculation takes place. Certain vulvas, wild with desire and lust, be it natural or in consequence of long abstention, throws themselves upon the approaching member, opening the mouth like a famished infant, to whom the mother offers the breast. In the same way, this vulva advances and retires upon the member, to bring it face to face with the matrix, as if in fear, unaided, it could not find the same. The vulva and the member resembles thus two skillful duelists. Each time that one of them rushes its antagonist, the latter opposes its shield to parry the blow and repulse the assault. The member represents the sword, and the matrix the shield. The one who first ejaculates the sperm is vanquished, while the one who is slowest is the victor. And assuredly it is a fine fight. I should like thus to fight without stopping to the day of my death. As the poet says, I have let them see the effect of a subtle shadow, spinning like an ever-busy spider. They said to me, how long will you go on? I answered them, I will work till I am dead. Al-Harrab, the fugitive. The vagina which, being very tight and short, is hurt by the penetration of a very large and soft member, it tries to escape to the right and left. It is thus, people say, like the vagina of most virgins, which, not yet having made the acquaintance of the member, and fearful of its approach, tries to get out of its way when it glides in between the thighs and wants to be admitted. As-Sabir, the resigned. This is the vulva which, having admitted the member, submits patiently to all its whims and movements. It is also said that this vulva is strong enough to suffer resignedly the most violent and prolonged coitus. If it were assaulted 100 times, it would not be vexed or annoyed, and instead of venting reproaches, it would give thanks to God. It will show the same patience if it had to do with several members who visit it successively. This kind of vagina is found in women of a glowing temperament. If they only knew how to do it, they would not allow the man to dismount, nor his member to retire for a single moment. Al-Musaffah, the barred one. This kind of vagina is not often met with. The defect which distinguished it is sometimes natural, sometimes it is the result of an unskillfully executed operation of circumcision upon the woman. It can happen that the operator makes a false move with his instrument and injures the two lips, or even only one of them. In healing, these form a thick scar, which bars the passage, and in order to make the vagina accessible to the member, a surgical operation and the use of the basturi will have to be resorted to. Al-Murur, the deep one. The vagina, which always has the mouth open, and the bottom of which is beyond sight, the longest members only can reach it. Al-'addad, the biter. The vulva, which, when the member has got into it and is burning with passion, opens and shuts again upon the same fiercely. It is chiefly when the ejaculation is coming that the man feels the head of his member bitten by the mouth of the matrix. And certainly there is an attractive power in the same when it clings to the gland, yearning for sperm, and draws it in as far as it can. If God in His power has decreed that the woman shall become pregnant, the sperm gets concentrated in the matrix, where it is gradually vivified. But if, on the contrary, God does not permit the conception, the matrix expels the seed, which then runs over the vagina. Al-Massas, the sucker. This is a vagina which, in its amorous heat, in consequence of voluptuous toyings or of long abstinence, begins to suck the member which has entered it so forcibly as if to deprive it of all its sperm, dealing with it as a child drawing on the breast of the mother. The poets have described it in the following verse. She, the woman, shows in turning up her robe, an object, the vulva, developed full and round, in semblance like a cup turned upside down. In placing thereupon your hand, you seem to feel a well-formed bosom, springy, firm, and full. In boring in your lance, it gets well bitten, and drawn in by suction, as the breast is by a child. And after having finished, if you wish to recommence, you'll find it flaming hot as any furnace. Another poet, may God grant all his wishes in paradise, has composed on the same theme the following lines. Like to a man extended on his chest, she, the vulva, fills the hand, which has to be well stretched to cover it. The places it occupies is standing forth like an unopened bud of the blossom of a plum tree. Assuredly the smoothness of its skin is like the beardless cheek of adolescence. Its conduct is but narrow, the entrance to it is not easy, and he who essays to get in feels as though he was butting against a coat of mail. And at the introduction it emits a sound like to the tearing of a woven stuff. The member, having filled its cavity, receives the lively welcome of a bite, such as the nipple of the nurse receives when placed between the nursling's lips for suction. Its lips are burning like a fire that is lighted, and how sweet it is, this fire, how delicious for me. Az-Zambur, the wasp. This kind of vulva is known by the strength and roughness of its fur. When the member approaches and tries to enter, it gets stung by the hairs as if by a wasp. Al-Hir, the hot one. This is one of the most praiseworthy vulvas. Warmth is in fact very esteemed in a vulva, and it may be said that the intensity of the enjoyment afforded by it is in proportion to the heat it develops. Poets have praised it in the following verse. The vulva possesses an intrinsic heat, shut in a solid heart and pent-up breast. Its fire communicates itself to him that enters it. It equals in intensity the fire of love. She is as tight as a well-fitting shoe, smaller than the circle of the apple of the eye. Al-Ladhidh, or the delicious. It has the reputation of procuring an unexampled pleasure, comparable only to the one felt by the beasts and the birds of prey, and for which they fight sanguinary combats. And if such effects are produced upon animals, what must they be for man? And so it is that all wars spring from the search for the voluptuous pleasure which the vagina procures, and which is the highest fortune of this world. It is a part of the delights of paradise awarded to us by God as a foretaste of what is waiting for us, namely, delights 1,000 times superior, and above which only the sight of benevolent God is to be placed. More names might certainly be found applicable to the sexual organs of woman, but the number of those mentioned above appears to me ample. The principal object of this work is to collect together all the remarkable and attractive matters concerning coitus, so that he who is in trouble may find consolation in it, and a man to whom erection offers difficulties may be able to look into it for a remedy against his weakness. Wise physicians have written that people whose members have lost their strength and are afflicted with impotence should assiduously read books treating of coition, and should study carefully the different kinds of love-making in order to recover their former vigour. A certain means of provoking erection is to look at animals in the act of coition. As it is not always everywhere possible to see animals whilst in the act of copulation, books on the subject of generation are indispensable. In every country, large or small, both the rich and poor have a taste for this sort of book, which may be compared to the stone of philosophy transforming common metals into gold. It is related, and God penetrates the most obscure matters and is most wise, that once upon a time, before the reign of the great Caliph Harun al-Rashid, there lived a buffoon who was the amusement of women, old people and children. His name was Jaidi. Many women granted him their favours freely, and he was much liked and well received by all. By princes, viziers, and qadis he was likewise very well treated. In general, all the world pampered him at that time. Indeed, any man that was a buffoon enjoyed the greatest considerations, for which the poets have said, "O time, of all the dwellers here below, you only elevate buffoons or fools, or him whose mother was a prostitute, or him whose anus as an inkstand serves, or him who from his youth has been a pander, who has no other work but to bring the two sexes together." Jaidi related the following story. The story of Jaidi and Fadihat al-Jamal. I was in love with a woman who was all grace and perfection, beautiful of shape, and gifted with all imaginable charms. Her cheeks were like roses, her forehead lily white, her lips like coral. She had teeth like pearls, and breasts like pomegranates. Her mouth opened round like a ring, her tongue seemed to be encrusted with precious gems, her eyes, black and finely slit, had the languor of slumber, and her voice the sweetness of sugar. With her form pleasantly filled out, her flesh was mellow like fresh butter, and pure as the diamond. As to her vulva, it was white, prominent, round as an arch. The center of it was red, and breathed fire without a trace of humidity, for, sweet to the touch, it was quite dry. When she walked in, it showed in relief like a dome or an inverted cup. In reclining, it was visible between her thighs, looking like a kid couched on a hillock. This woman was my neighbour. All the others played and laughed with me, jested with me, and met my suggestions with great pleasure. I revelled in their kisses, their close embraces and nibbling, and in sucking their lips, breasts, and necks. I had coition with all of them except my neighbour, and it was exactly her I wanted to possess in preference to all the rest. But instead of being kind to me, she avoided me rather. When I contrived to take her aside to trifle with her and try to rouse her gaiety, and spoke to her of my desires, she recited to me the following verses, the sense of which was mystery to me. Among the mountain tops I saw a tent placed firmly, apparent to all eyes, high up in mid-air. But oh, the pole that held it up was gone, and like a vase without a handle it remained, with all its cords undone, its center sinking in, forming a hollow like that of a kettle. Every time I told her of my passion, she answered me with these verses, which to me were void of meaning, and to which I could make no reply, which, however, only excited my love all the more. I therefore inquired of all those I knew, amongst wise men, philosophers, and savants, the meaning, but not one of them could solve the riddle for me, so as to satisfy my hate and appease my passion. Nevertheless, I continued my investigations until at last I heard of a savant named Abu Nawas, who lived in a far-off country, and who, I was told, was the only man capable of solving the enigma. I betook to him, appraised him of the distress I had with the woman, and recited to him the above-mentioned verses. Abu Nawas said to me, "This woman loves you to the exclusion of every other man. She is very corpulent and plump?" I answered, "It is exactly as you say. You have given her likeness as if she were before you, excepting what you say in respect of her love for me, for until now she has never given me any proof of it. She has no husband." "This is so," I said. Then he added, "I have reason to believe that your member is of small dimensions, and such a member cannot give her pleasure, nor quench her fire. For what she wants is a lover with a member like that of an ass. Perhaps it may not be so. Tell me the truth about this." When I had reassured him on that point, affirming that my member, which began to rise at the expression of his doubtings, was full-sized, he told me that in that case all difficulties would disappear, and explained to me the sense of the verses as follows. The tent, firmly planted, represents the vulva of grand dimensions, and placed well forward. The mountains between which it rises are the thighs. The stake which supported its center and has been torn up means that she has no husband, comparing the stake or pole that supports the tent to the virile member holding up the lips of the vulva. She is like a vase without a handle. This means, if the pail is without a handle to hang it up by, it is good for nothing, the pail representing the vulva and the handle the verge. The cords are undone and its center is sinking in. That is to say, as the tent without a supporting pole caves in at the center, inferior in this respect to the vault which remains upright without support, so can the woman who has no husband not enjoy complete happiness? From the words, it forms a hollow like that of a kettle, you may judge how lascivious God has made that woman in her comparisons. She likens her vulva to a kettle, which serves to prepare the tharid. Listen, if the tharid is placed in a kettle, to turn it out well, it must be stirred by means of a madalik, long and solid, whilst the kettle is steadied by the feet and hands. Only in that way it can be properly prepared. It cannot be done with a small spoon. The cook would burn her hands owing to the shortness of the handle, and the dish would not be well prepared. This is the symbol of this woman's nature, Jaidi. If your member has not the dimensions of a respectable madalik, serviceable to the good preparation of the tharid, it will not give her satisfaction, and moreover, if you do not hold her close to your chest, enlacing her with your hands and feet, it is useless to solicit her favours. Finally, if you let her consume herself by her own fire, like the bottom of a kettle which gets burnt if the madalik is not stirred upon it, you will not gratis her desire by the result. You see now what prevented her from acceding to your wishes. She was afraid that you would not be able to quench her flame after having fanned it. But what is the name of this woman, Jaidi?
Fadahat al-Jamal, the sunrise of beauty, I replied.
Return to her, said the sage, and take her these verses, and your affair will come to a happy issue, please God. You will then come back to me, and inform me what will have come to pass between you.
I gave my promise, and Abu Nawas recited to me the following lines.
Have patience now, O Fadihat al-Jamal. I understand your words, and all shall see how I obey them. O you, beloved and cherished by whoever can revel in your arms and glory in them. O apple of my eye, you thought I was embarrassed by the answer which I had to give you. Yes, certainly. It was the love I bore you made me look foolish in the eyes of all you know. They thought I was possessed by a demon, called me a merry andrew and buffoon. For God, what of buffoonery I've got! Should it be that no other member is like mine? Here, see it, measure it. What woman tastes it falls in love with me. In violent love. It is a well-known fact that you from afar may see it like a column. If it erects itself, it lifts my robe and shames me. Now take it kindly, put it in your tent, which is between the well-known mountains placed. It will be quite at home there. You will find it, not softening while inside, but sticking like an eel. Take it to form the handle of your vase. Come and examine it, and notice well how vigorous it is, and long in its erection. If you want but a proper madalik, a madalik to use between your thighs, take this to stir the center of your kettle. It will do good to you, O mistress mine. Your kettle, be it plated, will be satisfied.
Having learned these verses by heart, I took my leave of Abu Nawas and returned to Fadihat al-Jamal. She was, as usual, alone. I gave a slight knock at her door, and she came out at once, beautiful as the rising sun, and coming up to me, she said, "O enemy of God, what business has brought you here to me at this time?" I answered her, "O my mistress, a business of great importance." "Explain yourself, and I will see whether I can help you," she said.
"I shall not speak to you about it until the door is locked," I answered.
"Your boldness today is very great," she said.
And I, "True, O my mistress, boldness is one of my qualities." She then addressed me thus: "O enemy of yourself, O you most miserable of your race, if I were to lock the door, and you have nothing wherewith to satisfy my desires, what should I do with you? Face of a Jew! You will let me share your couch, and grant me your favours." She began to laugh, and after we had entered the house, she told a slave to lock the house door. As usual, I asked her to respond to my proposals. She then recited to me again the above-mentioned verses. When she had finished, I began to recite to her those which Abu Nawas had taught me. As I proceeded, I saw her more and more moved. I observed her giving way to yawns, to stretch herself, to sigh. I knew now I should arrive at the desired result. When I had finished, my member was in such a state of erection that it became like a pillar, still lengthening.
When Fadihat al-Jamal saw it in that condition, she precipitated herself upon it, took it into her hands, and drew it towards her thighs. And then I said, "O apple of my eyes, this may not be done here. Let us go into the chamber." She replied, "Leave me alone, O son of a debauched woman. Before God, I am losing my senses in seeing your member getting longer and longer, and lifting your robe. Oh, what a member! I never saw a finer one. Let it penetrate into this delicious plump vulva, which maddens all who hear it described, for the sake of which so many have died of love, and of which your superiors and masters themselves have not been able to get possession." I repeated, "I shall not do it anywhere else than in your chamber." She answered, "If you do not enter this minute this tender vulva, I shall die." As I still insisted upon repairing it to her room, she cried, "No, it is quite impossible. I cannot wait so long." I saw, in fact, her lips tremble, her eyes filling with tears. A general tremor ran over her. She changed colour and laid herself down upon her back, baring her thighs, the whiteness of which made her flesh appear like crystal tinged with carmine. Then I examined her vulva, a white copula with a purple centre, soft and charming. It opened like that of a mare on the approach of a stallion. At that moment she seized my member and kissed it, by saying, "By the religion of my father, it must enter, it must penetrate into my vulva." And drawing nearer to me, she pulled it towards her vagina. I now hesitated no longer to assist her with my member, and placed it against the entrance of her vulva. As soon as the head of my member touched the lips, the whole body of Fadihat al-Jamal trembled with excitement. Sighing and sobbing, she held me pressed to her bosom. Again I profited by this moment to admire the beauties of her vulva. It was magnificent, its purple centre setting off its whiteness all the more. It was round and without any imperfection, projecting like a splendidly curved dome over her belly. In one word, it was a masterpiece of creation, as fine as could be seen, the blessing of God, the best creator, upon it. And the woman who possessed this wonder had in her time no superior. Seeing her then in such transports, trembling like a bird, the throat of which has been cut, I pushed my dart into her. Thinking she might not be able to take in the whole of my member, I had entered cautiously. But she moved her buttocks furiously, saying to me, "This is not enough for my contentment." Making a strong push, I lodged my member completely in her, which made her utter a painful cry, but the moment after she moved with greater fury than before. She cried, "Do not miss the corners, neither high nor low, but above all things do not neglect the centre, the centre," she repeated. "If you feel it coming, let it go into my matrix so as to extinguish my fire." Then we moved alternately in and out, which was delicious. Our legs were interlaced, our muscles unbent. So we went on with kisses and claspings until the crisis came upon us simultaneously. We then rested and took breath after this mutual conflict. I wanted to withdraw my member, but she would not consent to this, and begged of me not to take it out. I acceded to her wish, but a moment later she took it out herself, dried it, and replaced it in her vulva. We renewed our game, kissing, pressing, and moving in rhythm. After a short time we rose and entered her chamber, without having this time accomplished the enjoyment. She gave me now a piece of an aromatic root, which she recommended to keep in my mouth, assuring me that as long as I had it there, my member would remain on the alert. She then asked me to lie down, which I did. She mounted upon me, and taking my member into her hands, she made it entirely enter into her vagina. I was astonished at the vigour of her vulva and at the heat emitted from it. The moment the opening of her matrix in particular excited my admiration. I never had an experience like it. It closely clasped my member and pinched the gland. With the exception of Fadihat al-Jamal, no woman had until then taken in my member to its full length. She was able to do so, I believe, owing to her being very plump and corpulent, and her vulva being large and deep. Fadihat al-Jamal, astride upon me, began to rise and descend. She kept crying out, wept, went slower, then accelerated her movements again, ceased to move altogether. When part of my member became visible, she looked at it, then took it out altogether to examine it closely, then to plunge it in again until it disappeared completely. So she continued until the enjoyment overcame her again. At last, having dismounted from me, she now laid herself down and asked me to go on to her. I did so, and she introduced my member entirely into her vulva. We thus continued our caresses, changing our positions in turns until night came on. I thought it would be proper to show a wish to go now, but she would not agree to this, and I had to give her my word that I would remain. I said to myself, this woman will not let me go at any price. When daylight comes, God will advise me. I remained with her, and all night long we kept caressing each other, and took but scanty rest. I counted that during that day and night I accomplished 27 times the act of coitus, and I became afraid that I should never more be able to leave the house of that woman. Having at last made good my escape, I went to visit Abu Nawas again, and informed him of all that happened. He was surprised and stupefied, and his first words were, "Oh, Jahidi, you can have neither authority nor power over such a woman, and she would make you do penance for all the pleasure you've had with the other women." However, Fadihat al-Jamal proposed to me to become her legitimate husband, in order to put a stop to the vexatious rumours that were circulating about her conduct. I, on the other hand, was only on the look for adultery. Asking the advice of Abu Nawas about it, he told me, "If you marry Fadihat al-Jamal, you will ruin your health, and God will withdraw his protection from you, and the worst of all will be that she will cuckold you, for she is insatiable with respect to coitus, and would cover you with shame." And I answered him, such is the nature of women, they are insatiable as far as their vulvas are concerned, and so long as their lust is satisfied, they do not care whether it be with a buffoon, a negro, a valet, or even with a man that is despised and reprobated by society. On this occasion, Abu Nawas depicted the character of women in the following verses: "Women are demons, and were born as such. No one can trust them, as is known to all. If they love a man, it is only out of caprice, and he to whom they are most cruel loves them most. Beings full of treachery and trickery, I aver the man who loves you truly is a lost man. He who believes me not can prove my word by letting woman's love get hold of him for years. If in your generous mood you have given them your all and everything for years and years, they will say afterwards, 'I swear by God, my eyes have never seen a thing he gave me.' After you have impoverished yourself for their sake, their cry from day to day will be forever, 'Give! Give, man, get up and buy and borrow.' If they cannot profit by you, they'll turn against you. They will tell lies about you and calumniate you. They do not recoil to use a slave in the master's absence, if once their passions are aroused, and they play tricks. Assuredly, if once their vulva is in rut, they only think of getting some member in erection. Preserve us, God, from woman's trickery, and of old women in particular. So be it." End of chapter 9. End of section 7.
Garden by Sheikh NEFZAOUI, translated by Richard Burton. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read to you by Alia Makki. Chapter 10. Concerning the organs of generation of animals. Know, O Vizier, God's blessing be with you, that the sexual organs of the various male animals are not analogous with the different natures of the male members which I have mentioned. The verges of animals are classed according to the species to which they belong, and these species are four in number. 1. The verges of animals with hoofs, as the horse, mule, ass, which verges are of larger size. Al-Farmul, the colossus. Abu Dimagh, the one with a head. Al-Kas, the serpent rolled up. Abu Barnata, the one with a hat. Al-Fallag, the splitter. Al-Karkit, the pointed staff. Al-Zit, the club. Al-Qantara, the bridge. Al-Harmak, the indomitable. Al-Razama, the mallet. Al-Munaffakh, the swollen. Abu Shamla, the fighter. 2. The verges of animals which have the kind of feet called akhfaf, as for instance the camel. Al-Ma'lum, the well-known. Al-Burzghal, the swinging one. Al-Tawil, the long one. Al-Mukhabbi, the hidden one. Al-Sharita, the ribbon. Al-Shaghab, the tuft. Al-Mustaqim, the firm one. Thaqil al-Ifaqa, the slow coach. 3. The verges of animals with split hoofs, like the ox and the sheep, etc. Al-Asab, the nerve. Raqiq al-Ras,
the small head, al-qurfaj, the rod, al-tawil, the long one, al-sawt, the whip, al-isuf, the nervous, for the ram. 4. And lastly, the members of animals with claws, as the lion, fox, dog, and other animals of this species. Al-qadib, the verge, al-mutamaghat, the one that will lengthen, al-kammus, the great gland. It is believed that all of the animals of God's creation, the lion is the most expert in respect to coition. If he meets the lioness, he examines her before copulation. He will know if she has already been covered by a male. When she comes to him, he smells at her, and if she has allowed herself to be crossed by a boar, he knows it immediately by the odour that animal has left upon her. He then smells her urine, and if the examination proves unfavourable, he gets into a rage and begins to lash with his tail right and left. Woe to the animal that comes at that time near him; it is certain to be torn to pieces. He then returns to the lioness, who, seeing that he knows all, trembles with terror. He smells again at her, utters a roar which makes the mountains shake, and falling upon her lacerates her back with his claws. He will even go as far as to kill her, and then befoul her body with his urine. It is said that the lion is most jealous and most intelligent of all animals. It is also averred that he is generous, and spares him who gets round him by fair words. A man who, on meeting a lion, uncovers his sexual parts, causes him to take a flight. Whoever pronounces before a lion the name of Daniel, hail be to him, also sends him flying, because the Prophet, hail be to him, has enjoined this upon the lion in respect to the invocation of his name. Therefore, when this name is pronounced, the lion departs without doing any harm. Several cases which prove this fact are cited. End of chapter 10. End of section 8. Garden by Sheikh NEFZAOUI, translated by Richard Burton. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Alia, Makki. Chapter 11. On the Deceits and Treacheries of Women. Know, O Vizier, to whom God be good, that the stratagems of women are numerous and ingenious. Their tricks will deceive Satan himself, for God the Highest has said in the Quran, chapter 12, verse 28, that the deceptive faculties of women are great, and He has likewise said in the Quran, chapter 6, verse 38, that the stratagems of Satan are weak. Comparing the word of God as to the ruses of Satan and woman contained in these two verses, it is easy to see how great these latter ones are. Deceived husband being convicted himself of infidelity. It is related that a man fell in love with a woman of great beauty, and possessing all perfections imaginable. He had made many advances to her which were repulsed. Then he had endeavoured to seduce her by rich presents, which were likewise declined. He lamented, complained, and was prodigal with his money in order to conquer her, but to no purpose, and he grew lean as a spectre. This lasted for some time, when he made the acquaintance of an old woman, whom he took into his confidence, complaining bitterly about it. She said to him, "I shall help you, please God." Forthwith she made her way to the house of the woman, in order to get an interview with her. But on arriving there, the neighbours told her that she could not get in, because the house was guarded by a ferocious bitch, who did not allow anyone to come in or depart, and in her malignity always flew at the faces of people. Hearing this, the old woman rejoiced, and said to herself, "I shall succeed, please God." She then went home and filled a basket with bits of meat. Thus provided, she returned to the woman's house and went in. The bitch, on seeing her, rose to spring at her, but she produced the basket with its contents and showed it her. As soon as the brute saw the viands, it showed its satisfaction by the movements of its tail and nostrils. The old woman, putting down the basket before it, spoke to it as follows: "Eat, O my sister. Your absence has been painful to me. I did not know what had become of you,
and I have been looking for you a long time. Appease your hunger."
While the animal was eating, and she stroked its back, the mistress of the house came to see who was there, and was not a little surprised to see the bitch, which would never suffer anybody to come near her, so friendly with a strange person. She said, "Oh, old woman, how is it that you know our dog?" The old woman gave no reply, but continued to caress the animal and utter lamentations. Then said the mistress of the house to her, "My heart aches to see you thus. Tell me the cause of your sorrow."
"This bitch," said the woman, "was formerly a woman and my best friend. One fine day she was invited with me to a wedding. She put on her best clothes and adorned herself with her finest ornaments. We then went together. On our way we were accosted by a man, who at the sight of her was seized with the most violent love, but she would not listen to him. Then he offered brilliant presents, which she also declined. This man, meeting her some days later, said to her, 'Surrender yourself to my passion, or else I shall conjure a god to change you into a bitch.' She answered, 'Conjure as much as you like.' The man then called the maledictions of heaven upon that woman, and she was changed into a bitch, as you see here."
At these words the mistress of the house began to cry and lament, saying, "Oh, my mother, I am afraid that I shall meet the same fate as this bitch."
"Why, what have you done?"
said the old woman. The other answered, "There is a man who has loved me since a long time, and I have refused to accede to his desires, nor did I listen to him, though the saliva was dried up in his mouth by his supplications, and in spite of the largest expenses he had gone to in order to gain my favour, I have always answered him that I should not consent, and now, oh my mother, I am afraid that he might call to God to curse me."
"Tell me how to know this man," said the old woman, "for fear that you might become like this animal."
"But how will you find him, and whom could I send to him?" The old woman answered,
"My daughter of mine, I shall render you this service and find him."
"Make haste, oh my mother, and see him before he conjures God against me."
"I shall find him still this day," answered the old woman, "and please God you shall meet him tomorrow."
With this the old woman took her leave, went on the same day to the man who had made her his confidant, and told him of the meeting arranged for the next day. So the next day the mistress of the house went to the old woman, for they had agreed that the rendezvous should take place there. When she arrived at the house, she waited for some time, but the lover did not come. No doubt he had been prevented from making his appearance by some matter of importance. The old woman, reflecting upon this mischance, thought to herself, "There is no might, no power but in God the Great." But she could not imagine what might have kept him away. Looking at the woman, she saw that she was agitated, and it was apparent that she wanted coition hotly. She got more and more restless, and presently asked, "Why does he not come?" The old woman made answer,
"Oh, my daughter, some serious affair must have interfered, probably necessitating a journey, but I shall help you under these circumstances."
She then put on her malahfa and went to look for the young man, but it was to no purpose, as she could not find out anything about him. Still continuing her search, the old woman was thinking,
"This woman is at this moment eagerly coveting a man. Why not try today another young man who might calm her ardor? Tomorrow I shall find the right one."
As she was thus walking and thinking, she met a young man of very pleasing exterior. She saw at once that he was a fit lover, and likely to help her out in her perplexity, and she spoke to him.
"Oh, my son, if I were to set you in a connection with a lady, beautiful, graceful, and perfect, would you make love to her?"
"If your words are true, I would give you this golden dinar," said he. The old woman, quite enchanted, took the money and conducted him to her house.
Now it so happened that this young man was the husband of the lady, which the old woman did not know till she had brought him. And the way she found it out was this. She went first into the house and said to the lady,
I have not been able to find the slightest trace of your lover, but failing him, I have brought you somebody to quench your fire for today. We will save the other for tomorrow. God has inspired me to do so.
The lady then went to the window to take a look at him whom the old woman wanted to bring to her, and getting sight of him, she recognized her husband. Just on the point of entering the house, she did not hesitate, but hastily donning her malahfa, she went straight to him, and striking him in the face, she exclaimed, "Oh, enemy of God and of yourself, what are you doing here? You surely came with the intention to commit adultery. I have been suspecting you for a time, and waited here every day while I was sending out the old woman to inveigle you to come in. This day I have found you out, and denial is of no use, and you always told me that you were not a rake. I shall demand a divorce this very day, now I know your conduct." The husband, believing that his wife spoke the truth, remained silent and abashed. Learn from this the deceitfulness of woman and what she is capable of. Story of the lover against his will. A story is told of a certain woman who was desperately in love with one of her neighbors, whose virtue and piety were well known. She declared to him her passion, but finding all her advances constantly repulsed, in spite of all her wiles, she resolved to have her satisfaction nevertheless, and this is the way she went to work her purpose. One evening she apprised her negress that she intended to set a snare for that man, and the negress by her order left the street door open. Then in the middle of the night she called the negress and gave her the following instruction: "Go and knock with this stone at our street door as hard as you can, without taking any notice of the cries I shall utter, or the noise I shall make. As soon as you hear the neighbor opening his door, come back and knock the same way at the inner door. Take care that he does not see you, and come in at once if you observe somebody coming." The negress executed this order punctually. Now the neighbor was by nature a compassionate man, always disposed to assist people in distress, and his help was never asked in vain. On hearing the noise of the blows struck at the door and the cries of his neighbor, he asked his wife what this might mean, and she replied, "It is our neighbor so and so who is attacked in her house by thieves." He went in great haste to her aid, but scarcely had he entered the house when the negress closed the door upon him. The woman seized him and uttered loud screams. He protested, but the mistress of the house put, without any more ado, this condition before him: "If you do not consent to do with me so and so, I shall tell that you have come in here to violate me, and hence all this noise." "The will of God be done," said the man. "Nobody can go against him, nor escape from his might." He then tried sundry subterfuges in order to escape, but in vain, for the mistress of the house recommenced to scream and make a row, which brought a good many people to the spot. He saw that his reputation would be compromised if he continued his resistance, and surrendered, saying, "Save me, I am ready to satisfy you." "Go into this chamber and close the door behind you," said the lady of the house. "If you want to leave this house with honor, do not attempt escape unless you wish those people to know that you are the author of all this commotion." Then he saw how determined she was to have her way. He did as she had told him. She, on her part, went out to the neighbors that had come to help her, and giving them some kind of explanation, dismissed them, then went away condoling with her. Left alone, she shut the doors and returned to her unwilling lover. She kept him in X for a whole week, and only set him free after she had completely drained him. Learn from this the deceitfulness of women and what they are capable of. Larceny of love. The following story is told of two women who inhabited the same house. The husband of one of them had a member long, thick, and hard, while the husband of the other had, on the contrary, that organ little, insignificant, and soft. The first one rose always pleasant and smiling. The other one got up in the morning in tears and vexation. One day the two women were together, and spoke of their husbands. The first one said, "I live in the greatest happiness. My bed is a couch of bliss. When my husband and I are together in it, It is the witness of our supreme pleasure, of our kisses and embraces, of our joys and amorous sighs. When my husband's member is in my vulva, it tops it completely. It stretches itself out until it touches the bottom of my vagina, and it does not take its leave until it has visited every corner, threshold, vestibule, ceiling, and centre. When the crisis arrives, it takes its position in the very centre of the vagina, which it floods with tears. It is in this way we quench our fire and appease our passion. The second answered, I live in the greatest grief. Our bed is a bed of misery, and our coition is a union of fatigue and trouble, of hate and malediction. When my husband's member enters my vulva, there is a space left open, and it's so short it can't touch the bottom. When it is in erection, it is twisted all ways, and cannot procure any pleasure. Feeble and meagre, it can scarcely ejaculate a drop, and its service cannot afford pleasure to any woman. Such was the almost daily conversation which the two women had together. It happened, however, that the woman who had so much cause for complaint thought in her heart how delightful it would be to commit adultery with the other one's husband. She thought to herself, it must be brought about, if it only be for once. Then she watched her opportunity until her husband had to be absent for a night from the house. In the evening she made preparation to get her project carried out, and perfumed herself with sweet scents and essence. Then the night was advanced to about a third of its duration. She noiselessly entered the chamber in which the other woman and her husband were sleeping, and groped her way to their couch. Finding that there was a free space between them, she slipped in. There was scant room, but each of the spouses thought it was the pressure of the other, and gave way a little, so she contrived to glide between them. She then quietly waited until the other woman was in profound sleep, and then, approaching the husband, she brought her flesh in contact with his. He awoke, and smelling the perfumed odours which she exhaled, he was in erection at once. He drew her towards him, but she said in a low voice, "Let me go to sleep." He answered, "Quiet, and let me do it. The children will not hear anything." Then she pressed close up to him, so as to get him farther away from his wife, and said, "Do as you like, but do not awaken the children who are close by." She took the precaution for fear that his wife would wake up. The man, however, roused by the odour of the perfumes, drew her ardently towards him. She was plump and mellow, and her vulva projecting. He mounted upon her and Take the member in your hand as usual." She took it, and was astonished at its size and magnificence, then introduced it to her vulva. The man, however, observed that his member had been taken in entirely, which he had never been able to do with his wife. The woman, on her part, found that she had never received such a benefit from her husband. The man was quite surprised. He worked his will upon her a second and third time, but his astonishment only increased. At last he got off her and stretched himself along her side. As soon as the woman found that he was asleep, she slipped out, left the chamber, and returned to her own. In the morning, the husband, on rising, said to his wife, "Your embraces have never seemed so sweet to me as last night. I never breathed such sweet perfumes as those you exhaled." "What embraces and what perfumes are you speaking of?" asked the wife. "I have not a particle of perfume in the house." She called him a storyteller, and assured him that he must have been dreaming. He then began to consider whether he might not have deceived himself, and agreed with his wife that he must actually have dreamed it all. Appreciate, after this, the deceitfulness of women, and what they are capable of. Story of the woman with the two husbands. It is related that a man, after having lived for some time in the country to which he had gone, became desirous of getting married. He addressed himself to an old woman who had experience in such matters, asking her whether she could find him a wife. And she replied, "I can find you a girl gifted with great beauty, and perfect in shape and comeliness. She will surely suit you, for besides of having these qualities, she is virtuous and pure.
Only mark, her business occupies her all day, but during the night she will be yours completely. It is for this reason she keeps herself reserved, as she apprehends that a husband might not agree to this."
The man replied, "This girl need not be afraid. I too am not at liberty during the day, and I only want her for the night." He then asked her in marriage. The old woman brought her to him, and he liked her. From that time they lived together, observing the conditions under which they had come together. The man had an intimate friend, whom he introduced to the old woman, who had arranged his marriage according to the conditions mentioned, and which friend had requested the man to ask her to do him the same service. They went to the old woman and solicited her assistance in the matter.
"This is very easy," she said. "I know a girl of great beauty who will dissipate your heaviest troubles. Only the business she is carrying on keeps her at work all night, but she will be your friend all day long."
"This shall be no hindrance," replied the friend. She then brought the young girl to him. He was pleased with her, and married her on the conditions agreed upon. But before long the two friends found out that the two wives which the old harridan had procured them were only one woman. Appreciate, after this, the deceitfulness of women, and what they are capable of. Story of Bahia. It is related that a woman of the name of Bahia, or Splendid Beauty, had a lover whose relations to her were soon a mystery to no one, for which reason she had to leave him. Her absence affected him to such a degree that he fell ill because he could not see her. One day he went to see one of his friends, and asked him, "Oh, my brother, an ungovernable desire has seized me, and I can wait no more. Could you accompany me on a visit I am going to pay to Bahia, the well-beloved of my heart?" The friend declared himself willing. The next day they mounted their horses, and after a journey of 2 days they arrived near the place where Bahia dwelt. There they stopped. The lover said to his friend, "Go and see the people that live about there, and ask for their hospitality, but take care not to divulge our intentions, and try in particular to find the servant girl of Bahia, to whom you can say that I am here, and whom you will charge with a message to her mistress, that I would like to see her." He then described the servant maid to him. The friend went, met the servant, and told her all that was necessary. She went at once to Bahia, and repeated to her what she had been told. Bahia sent to the friend a message: "Inform him who sent you that the meeting will take place tonight, near such and such a tree, at such and such an hour." Returning to the lover, the friend communicated to him the decision of Bahia about the rendezvous. At the hour that had been fixed, the two friends were near to the tree. They had not waited long for Bahia. As soon as her lover saw her coming, he rushed to meet her, kissed her, pressed her to his heart, and they began to embrace and caress each other. The lover said to her, "Oh, Bahia, is there no way to enable us to pass the night together without rousing the suspicion of your husband?" She answered, "Oh, before God, if it will give you pleasure, the means to contrive this are not wanting." "Hasten," said her lover, "to let me know how it may be done." She then asked him, "Your friend here, is he devoted to you and intelligent?" He answered, "Yes." She then rose, took off her garments, and handed them to the friend, who gave her his, in which she then dressed herself. Then she made the friend put on her clothes. The lover said, surprised, "What are you going to do?" "Be silent," she answered. And addressing herself to the friend, she gave him the following explanations: "Go to my house and lie down in my bed. After a third part of the night is past, my husband will come and ask you for the pot into which they milk the camels. You will then take up the vase, but you must keep it in your hands until he takes it from you. This is our usual way. Then he will go and return with the pot filled with milk, and say to you, 'Here is the pot,' but you must not take it from him until he has repeated these words. Then take it out of his hands, or let him put it on the ground himself. After that you will not see anything more of him till morning. After the pot has been put on the ground, and my husband gone, drink the third part of the milk, and replace the pot on the ground." The friend went, observed all these recommendations, and when the husband returned with a pot full of milk, he did not take it out of his hands until he had said twice, "Here is the pot." Unfortunately, he withdrew his hands when the husband was going to set it down. The latter, thinking the pot was being held, let it go, and the vase fell upon the ground and was broken. The husband, in the belief that he was speaking to his wife, exclaimed, "What have you been thinking of?" and beat him with a switch till it broke, then took another and continued to batter him, stroke on stroke, enough to break his back. The mother and sister of Bahia came running to the spot to tear her from his hands. He had fainted. Luckily they succeeded in getting the husband away. The mother of Bahia soon came back and talked to him so long that he was fairly sick of her talk, but he could do nothing but be silent and weep. At last she finished, saying,
Have confidence in God and obey your husband. As for your lover, he cannot come now and see and console you, but I will send your sister to keep you company.
and so she went away. She did send, indeed, the sister of Bahia, who began to console her and curse him who had beaten her. He felt his heart warming towards her, for he had seen that she was of resplendent beauty, endowed with all perfections, and like the full moon in the night. He placed her hand over her mouth, so as to prevent her from speaking, and said to her, "Oh lady, I am not what you think. Your sister Bahia is at present with her lover. I have run into danger to do her a service. Will you not take me under your protection? If you denounce me, your sister will be covered with shame. As for me, I have done my part, but evil may fall back upon you." The young girl began to tremble like a leaf, in thinking of the consequences of her sister's doing, and then, beginning to laugh, surrendered herself to the friend who had proved himself so true. They passed the remainder of the night in bliss, kisses, embraces, and mutual enjoyment. He found her the best of the best. In her arms he forgot the beating he had received, and they did not cease to play, toy, and make love till daybreak. He then returned to his companion. Bahia asked him how he had fared, and he said to her, "Ask your sister. By my faith, she knows it all. Only know that we have passed the night in mutual pleasure, kissing and enjoying ourselves until now." They exchanged clothes again, each one taking his own, and the friend told Bahia all the particulars of what happened to him. Appreciate after this the deceitfulness of women, and what they are capable of. The story of the man who was an expert in stratagems and was duped by a woman. A story is told of a man who had studied all the ruses and all the stratagems invented by women for the deception of men, and boasted that no woman could dupe him. A woman of great beauty and full of charms got to hear of his conceit. She therefore prepared for him in the Majlis a collation, in which several kinds of wine figured, and nothing was wanting in the way of rare and choice viands. She then sent for him and invited him to come and see her. As she was famed for her great beauty and the rare perfection of her person, she had roused his desires, and he made haste to avail himself of her invitation. She was dressed in her finest garments, and exhaled the choicest perfumes, and assuredly whoever had thus seen her would have been troubled in his mind. And thus, when he was admitted into her presence, he was fascinated by her charms, and plunged into admiration of her marvellous beauty. This woman, however, appeared to be preoccupied on account of her husband, and allowed it to be seen that she was afraid of his coming back from one minute to another. It must be mentioned that this husband was very proud, very jealous, and very violent, and would not have hesitated to shed the blood of anyone whom he would have found prowling about his house. What would have he done, and with much more reason, to the man whom he might have found inside? While the lady and he, who flattered himself that he should possess her, were amusing themselves in the Majlis, a knock at the house door filled the lover with fear and trouble, particularly when the lady cried, "'Tis my husband who is returning!" All in tremble, she hid him in the closet, which was in the room, shut the door upon him, and left the key in the Majlis. Then she opened the house door. Her husband, for it was he, saw, on entering, the wine and all the preparations that had been made. Surprised, he asked what this meant. "It means what you see," she answered. "But for whom is all this?" he asked. "It is for my lover, whom I have here." "And where is he?" "In this closet," she said, pointing her finger to the place where the sufferer was confined. At these words the husband started. He rose and went to the closet, but found it locked. "Where's the key?" he said. She answered, "Here," throwing it to him. But as he was putting it into the lock, she burst out laughing uproariously. He turned towards her and said, "What are you laughing at?" "I laugh," she answered, "at the weakness of your judgment, and your want of reason and reflection. Oh, you man without sense! Do you think that if I had in reality a lover, and had admitted him into this room, I should have told you that he was here, and where he was hidden? That is certainly not likely. I had no other thought than to offer you a collation on your return, and wanted only to have a joke with you in doing as I did. If I had had a lover, I should certainly not have made you my confidant." The husband left the key in the lock of the closet without having turned it, returned to the table and said, "True, I rose, but I have not the slightest doubt about the sincerity of your words." Then they ate and drank together, and made love. The man in the closet had to stop there until the husband went out. Then the lady went to set him free, and found him quite undone, and in a bad state. When he came out, after having escaped an imminent peril, she said to him, "Well, you wiseacre, who knows so well the stratagems of women, of all those you know, is there one equal to this?" He made answer, "I am now convinced that your stratagems are countless." Appreciate after this the deceits of women, and what they are capable of. Story of the lover who was surprised by the unexpected arrival of the husband. It is related that a woman who was married to a violent and brutal man, having her lover with her, on the unexpected arrival of her husband, who was returning from a journey, had only just time to hide him under the bed. She was compelled to let him remain in this dangerous and unpleasant position, knowing of no expedient which might enable him to leave the house. In her restlessness she went to and fro, and having gone to the street door, one of the neighbours, a woman, saw that she was in trouble, and asked her the reason of it. She told her what had happened. The other then said, "Return into the house. I will charge myself with the safety of your lover, and I promise that he shall come out unharmed." Then the woman re-entered her house. Her neighbour was not long in joining her, and together they prepared the meal, and then they all sat down to eat and drink. The woman sat facing her husband, and the neighbour opposite the bed. The latter began to tell stories and anecdotes about the tricks of women, and the lover under the bed heard all that was going on. Pursuing her tales, the neighbour told the following one. A married woman had a lover whom she loved tenderly, and by whom she was equally loved. One day the lover came to her in the absence of her husband, but the latter happened to return home unexpectedly, just as they were together. The woman, knowing of no better place, hid her lover under the bed, then sat down by her husband, who was taking some refreshment, and joked and played with him. Amongst other playful games, she covered her husband's eyes with a napkin, and her lover took this opportunity to come out from under the bed, and escape unobserved. The wife understood at once how to profit by this tale. Taking a napkin and covering the eyes of her husband with it, she said, "Then it was by means of this ruse that the lover was helped out of his dilemma." And the lover, taking opportunity, succeeded in making good his escape unobserved by the husband. Unconscious of what had happened, this latter laughed at the story, and his merriment was still increased by the last words of his wife and by her action. Appreciate after this the deceitfulness of women, and what they are capable of. End of chapter 11. End of section 9. Of the Perfumed Garden by Sheikh NEFZAOUI, translated by Richard Burton. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Alia, Makki. Chapter 12. Concerning sundry observations useful to know for men and women. Know, O Vizier, to whom God be good, that the information contained in this chapter is of the greatest utility, and it is only in this book that such can be found. Assuredly, to know things is better than to be ignorant of them. Knowledge may be bad, but ignorance is still more so. The knowledge in question concerns matters unknown to you and relating to women. There was once a woman named Ma'arbada, who was considered to be the most knowing and the wisest person of her time. She was a philosopher. One day various questions were put to her, and among them the following, which I shall give here with her answers. In what part of a woman's body does her mind reside? Between her thighs. And where her enjoyment? In the same place. And where the love of men and the hatred of them? In the vulva, she said, adding, to the man whom we love we give our vulva, and we refuse it to him we hate. We share our property with the man we love, and are content with whatever little he may be able to bring to us. If he has no fortune, we take him as he is. But on the other hand, we keep at a distance him whom we hate, were he to offer us wealth and riches. Where in a woman are located knowledge, love, and taste? In the eye, the heart, and the vulva. When asked for explanations on this subject, she replied, knowledge dwells in the eye, for it is the woman's eyes that appreciates the beauty of form and appearance. By the medium of this organ, love penetrates into the heart and dwells in it and enslaves it. A woman in love pursues the object of her love and lays snares for it. If she succeed, there will be an encounter between the beloved one and her vulva. The vulva tastes him, and then knows his sweet or bitter flavor. It is in fact the vulva which knows how to distinguish, by tasting, the good from the bad. Which virile member are preferred by women? What women are most eager for coitus, and which are those who detest it? Which are the men preferred by women, and which are those whom they abominate? She answered, not all women have the same conformation of vulva, and they also differ in their manner of making love, and in their love for and their aversion to things. The same disparities exist in men, both with regard to their organs and their tastes. A woman of plump form and with a shallow uterus will look out for a member which is both short and thick, which will completely fill her vagina without touching the bottom of it. A long and a large member would not suit her. A woman with a deep-lying uterus and consequently a long vagina only yearns for a member which is long and thick and of ample proportions, and thus fills her vagina in its whole extensions. She will despise the man with a small and slender member, for he could never satisfy her in coition. The following distinctions exist in the temperaments of women: the bilious, the melancholy, the sanguine, the phlegmatic, and the mixed. Those with the bilious or melancholy temperament are not much given to coitus, and like it only with men of the same disposition. Those who are sanguine or phlegmatic love coition to excess, and if they encounter a member, they would never let it leave their vulva if they could help it. With these also it is only men of their own temperament who can satisfy them, and if such a woman were married to a bilious or melancholy man, they would lead a sorry life together. As regards to mixed temperaments, they exhibit neither marked predilection for nor aversion against coitus. It has been observed that under all circumstances little women love coitus more and evince a stronger affection for the virile member than women of a large size. Only long and vigorous members suit them. In them they find the delight of their existence and of their couch. There are also women who love the coitus only on the edge of their vulva, and when a man lying upon them wants to take his member into the vagina, they take it out with the hand and place its gland between the lips of the vulva. I have every reason to believe that this is only the case with young girls, or with women not used to men. I pray God to preserve us from such, or from women for whom it is a matter of impossibility to give themselves up to men. There are women who will do their husbands' behest, and will satisfy them and give them voluptuous pleasure by coition, only if compelled by blows and ill treatment. Some people ascribe this conduct to the aversion they feel against coition or against the husband, but this is not so. It is simply a question of temperament and character. There are also women who do not care for coition because all their ideas turn upon the grandeurs, personal honors, ambitious hopes, or business cares of the world. With others this indifference springs, as it may be, from purity of the heart, or from jealousy, or from pronounced tendency of their souls towards another world, or lastly from past violent sorrows. Furthermore, the pleasure which they feel in coition depends not alone upon the size of the member, but also upon the particular conformation of their own natural parts. Among those the vulva called from its form, al-murabba', or the square one, and al-muraffa', the projecting, is remarkable. This vulva has the peculiarity of projecting all around. When the woman is standing up and closes her thighs, it burns for coitus. Its slit is narrow, and it is called the kalihimi, or the pressed one. The woman who has such a one likes only large members, and they must not let her wait long for the crisis. But this is a general characteristic of women. As to the desire of men for coition, I must say that they are also addicted to it more or less according to their different temperaments, which are 5 in number, like the women's, with the difference that the hankering of the woman after the member is stronger than that of the man after the vulva. What are the faults of women? Mu'arbada replied to this question: the worst of women is she who immediately cries out loud as soon as her husband wants to touch the smallest amount of her property for his necessities. In the same line stands she who divulges matters which her husband wants to be kept secret. Are there any more? She is asked. She adds, the woman of a jealous disposition, and the woman who raises her voice so as to drown that of her husband. She who disseminates scandals, the woman that scowls, the one who is always burning to let men see her beauty and cannot stay at home. And with respect to this last, let me add that a woman who laughs much and is constantly seen at the street door may be taken to be an arrant prostitute. Bad also are those women who mind people's affairs, those who are always complaining, those who steal things belonging to their husbands, those of a disagreeable and imperious temper, those who are not grateful for the kindnesses received, those that will not share the conjugal couch, or incommode their husbands by the uncomfortable positions they take in it, those who are inclined to deceit, treachery, calumny, and ruse. Then there are still women who are unlucky in whatever they undertake, those who are always inclined to blame and censure, those who invite their husbands to fulfill their conjugal duty only when it is convenient for them, those that make noises in bed, and lastly, those who are shameless, without intelligence, tattlers, and curious. Here you have the worst specimens amongst women. End of chapter 12. Chapter 13. Concerning the causes of enjoyment in the act of generation. Know, O Vizier, to whom God be good, that the causes which tend to develop the passion for coition are 6 in number: the fire of an ardent love, the superabundance of sperm, the proximity of the loved person whose possession is eagerly desired, the beauty of the face, exciting viands and contact. Know also that the causes of the pleasure in cohabitation and the conditions of enjoyment are numerous, but that the principal and the best ones are the heat of the vulva, the narrowness, dryness, and sweet exhalation of the same. If any one of these conditions is absent, there is at the same time something wanting in the voluptuous enjoyment. But if the vagina unites the required qualifications, the enjoyment is complete. In fact, a moist vulva relaxes the nerves, a cold one robs the member of all its vigour, and bad exhalations from the vagina detract greatly from the pleasure, as is also the case if the latter is very wide. The acme of enjoyment, which is produced by the abundance and impetuous ejaculation of the sperm, depends upon one circumstance, and this is that the vulva is furnished with a suction pump, or orifice of the uterus, which will clasp the virile member and suck up the sperm with an irresistible force. The member once seized by the orifice, the lover is powerless to retain the sperm, for the orifice will not relax its hold until it has extracted every drop of the sperm, and certainly if the crisis arrives before this gripping of the gland takes place, the pleasure of the ejaculation will not be complete.
Know that there are 8 things which give strength to and favor the ejaculation. These are bodily health, the absence of all care and worry, an unembarrassed mind, natural gaiety of spirit, good nourishment, wealth, the variety of the faces of women, and the variety of their complexions. If you wish to acquire strength for coitus, take fruit of the mastic tree, or dir, pound them, and macerate them with oil and honey, then drink of the liquid first thing in the morning. You will thus become vigorous for coitus, and there will be abundance of sperm produced. The same result will be obtained by rubbing the virile member and the vulva with gall from the jackal. This rubbing stimulates those parts and increases their vigor. A savant named Al-Gelinos has said, "He who feels that he is weak for coition should drink before going to bed a glassful of very thick honey, and eat 20 almonds and 100 grains of the pine tree. He must follow this regime for 3 days. He may also pound onion seed, sift it, and mix it afterwards with honey, stirring the mixture well, and take of this mixture while still fasting." A man who would wish to acquire vigour for coition may likewise melt down fat from the hump of a camel, and rub his member with it just before the act. It will then perform wonders, and the woman will praise it for its work. If you would make the enjoyment still more voluptuous, masticate a little cube of pepper or cardamom grains of the large species, put a certain quantity of it upon the head of your member, and then go to work. This will procure for you, as well as for the woman, a matchless enjoyment. The ointment from the balm of the Judea or of Makka produces a similar effect. If you would make yourself very strong for coitus, pound very carefully prather together with ginger, mix them while pounding with ointment of lilac, then rub with this compound your abdomen, the testicles, and the verge. This will make you ardent for coitus. You will likewise predispose yourself for cohabitation, sensibly increasing the volume of your sperm, gain increased vigour for the action, and procure for yourself extraordinary erections by eating of chrysocolla the size of a mustard grain. This excitement resulting from the use of this nostrum is unparalleled, and all your qualification for coitus will be increased. If you wish the woman to be inspired with a great desire to cohabit with you, take a little of cubebs, perath, ginger, and cinnamon, which you will have to masticate just before joining her. Then moisten your member with your saliva, and do her business for her. From that moment she will have such an affection for you, and she can scarcely be a moment without you. A virile member, rubbed with ass's milk, will become uncommonly strong and vigorous. Green peas, boiled carefully with onions, and powdered with cinnamon, ginger, and cardamoms, well pounded, create for the consumer considerable amorous passion and strength in coitus. End of chapter 13. End of section 10.
Perfumed Garden by Sheikh NEFZAOUI, translated by Richard Burton. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Alia Makki.
Chapter 14. Description of the uterus of sterile women, and the treatment of the same. Know, O Vizier, God be good to you, that wise physicians have plunged into this sea of difficulties to very little purpose. Each one has looked at the matter from his own point of view, and in the end the question has been left in the dark. Amongst the causes which determine the sterility of women may be taken the obstruction of the uterus by clots of blood, the accumulation of water, the want of or defective sperm of the man, organic malformations of the parts of the latter, internal defects in the uterus, stagnation of the courses, and the corruption of the menstrual fluid, and the habitual presence of wind in the uterus. Other savants attribute the sterility of women to the action of spirits and spells. Sterility is common in women who are very corpulent, so that their uterus gets compressed and cannot conceive, not only being able to take up the sperm, especially if the husband's member is short and his testicles are very fat. In such a case the act of copulation can only be imperfectly completed.
One of the remedies against sterility consists of the marrow from the hump of a camel, which the woman spreads on a piece of linen, and rubs her sexual parts with, after having been purified subsequently to her courses. To complete the cure, she takes some fruits of the plant called jackal's grapes, squeezes the juice out of them into a vase, and then adds a little vinegar. Of this medicine she drinks, fasting for 7 days, during which time her husband will take care to have copulation with her. The woman may besides pound a small quantity of sesame grain and mix its juice with the bean's weight of sandarak powder. Of this mixture she drinks during 3 days after her periods. She is then fit to receive her husband's embraces. The first of these beverages is to be taken separately, and in the first instance, after this the second, which will have salutary effect, if so it pleases Almighty God. There is still another remedy. A mixture is made of niter, gall from a sheep or cow, a small quantity of the plant named al-mesk, and of the grains of that plant. The woman saturates a plug of soft wool with this mixture, and rubs her vulva with it after menstruation. She then receives the caresses of her husband, and, with the will of God the highest, will become pregnant. End of chapter 14. Chapter 15. Concerning the causes of impotence in men. Know, O Vizier, God be with you, that there are men whose sperm is vitiated by the inborn coldness of their nature, by diseases of their organs, by purulent discharges, and by fevers. Urinary canal. There are also men with the urinary canal in their verge deviating, owing to a downward curve. The result of such conformation is that the seminal liquid cannot be ejected in a straight direction, but falls downwards. Other men have the member too short or too small to reach the neck of the matrix, or their bladder is ulcerated, or they are affected by other mixtures which prevent them from coition. Finally, there are men who arrive quicker at crisis than the woman, in consequence of which the two emissions are not simultaneous. There is in such case no conception. All these circumstances serve to explain the absence of conception in women, but the principal cause of all is the shortness of the virile member. As another cause of impotence may be regarded the sudden transmission from hot to cold, and vice versa, and a great number of analogous reasons. Men whose impotence is due either to the corruption of their sperm owing to their cold nature, or to maladies of the organs, or to discharges or fevers and similar ills, or to their excessive promptness in ejaculation, can be cured. They should eat stimulant pastry containing honey, ginger, pirather, syrup of vinegar, hellebore, garlic, cinnamon, nutmeg, cardamom, sparrow's tongues, Chinese cinnamon, long pepper, and other spices. They will be cured by using them. As to the other afflictions which we have indicated, the curvature of the urethra, the small dimensions of the virile member, the ulcers on the bladder, and the other infirmities which are adverse to coition, God only can cure them. End of chapter 15. Chapter 16. Undoing of aiguillettes, or impotence for a time. Know, O Vizier, God be good to you, that impotence arises from 3 causes. Firstly, from the tying of the aiguillettes; secondly, from a feeble and relaxed constitution; and thirdly, from too premature ejaculation. To cure the tying of aiguillettes, you must take kalanga, cinnamon from Mecca, cloves, India cachew, nutmeg, Indian cubebs, sparrowwort, cinnamon, Persian pepper, Indian thistle, cardamoms, pirather, laurel seed, and gilliflowers. All these ingredients must be pounded together carefully, and one drinks of it as much as one can, morning and night, in broth, particularly in pigeon broth. Fowl broth may, however, be substituted just as well. Water is to be drunk before and after taking it. The compound may likewise be taken with honey, which is the best method, and gives the best results. The man whose ejaculation is too precipitate must take nutmeg and incense or oliban, mixed together with honey. If the impotence arises from weakness, the following ingredients are to be taken in honey, viz. pirather, nettle seed, a little spurge or cavadil, ginger, cinnamon of Mecca, and cardamom. This preparation will cause the weakness to disappear and effect the cure, with the permission of God the Highest. I can warrant the efficacy of all these preparations, the virtue of which has been tested. The impossibility of performing the coitus owing to the absence of stiffness in the member is also due to other causes. It will happen, for instance, that a man with his virgin erection will find it getting flaccid just when he is on the point of introducing it between the thighs of the woman. He thinks this is impotence, whilst it is simply the result maybe of an exaggerated respect for the woman, maybe of a misplaced bashfulness, maybe because one has observed something disagreeable, or on account of an unpleasant odour. Finally, owing to a feeling of jealousy inspired by the reflection that the woman is no longer a virgin and has served the pleasure of other men. End of chapter 16. Chapter 17. Prescriptions for increasing the dimensions of small members and for making them splendid. Know, O Vizier, God be good to you, that this chapter, which treats of the size of the virile member, is of the first importance for both men and women. For the men, because from a good-sized and vigorous member there springs the affection and love of women; for the women, because it is by such members that their amorous passions are appeased, and the greatest pleasure is procured for them. This is evident from the fact that many men, solely by reason of their insignificant members, are, as far as coition is concerned, objects of aversion to women, who likewise entertain the same sentiments with regard to those whose members are soft, nerveless, and relaxed. Their whole happiness consists in the use of robust and strong members. A man, therefore, with a small member who wants to make it grand, or fortify it for the coitus, must rub it before copulation with tepid water, until it gets red and extended by the blood flowing into it. In consequence of the heat, he must then anoint it with a mixture of honey and ginger, rubbing it in sedulously. Then let him join the woman; he will procure for her such pleasure that she objects to getting him off her again. Another remedy consists in a compound made of a moderate quantity of pepper, lavender, galanga, and musk, reduced to powder, sifted, and mixed up with honey and preserved ginger. The member, after having first washed in warm water, is then vigorously rubbed with the mixture. It will then grow large and brawny, and afford to the woman a marvellous feeling of voluptuousness. A third remedy is the following. Wash the member in water until it becomes red and enters into erection. Then take a piece of soft leather, upon which spread hot pitch, and envelope the member with it. It will not be long before the member raises its head, trembling with a passion. The leather is to be left on until the pitch grows cold, and the member is again in a state of repose. This operation, several times repeated, will have the effect of making the member strong and thick. A fourth remedy is based upon the use of leeches, but only if such is alive in water. You put as many of them into a bottle as can be got in, and fill it up with oil. Then expose the bottle to the sun until the heat of the same has effected a complete mixture. With the fluid thus obtained, the member is to be rubbed several consecutive days, and it will, being by thus treated, become of a good size and of full dimensions. For another procedure I will here note the use of an ass's member. Procure one, and boil it, together with onions and a large quantity of corn. With this dish feed fowls, which you eat afterwards. One can also macerate the ass's verge in oil, and use the fluids thus obtained for anointing one's member, and drinking of it. Another way is to bruise leeches with oil, and rub the verge with this ointment. Or, if it's preferred, the leeches may be put into a bottle, and thus enclosed, buried in a warm dunghill until they are dissolved into a coherent mass, and form a sort of liniment, which is used for repeatedly anointing the member. The member is certainly greatly to benefit by this. It may likewise take a rosin and wax, mixed with tubipor, asphodel, and cobbler's glue, with which mixture rub the member, and the result will be that its dimensions will be enlarged. The efficacy of all these remedies is well known, and I have tested them. End of chapter 17.
End of section 11.
Perfumed Garden by Sheikh NEFZAOUI, translated by Richard Burton. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Alia, Makki. Chapter 18. Of things that take away the bad smell from the armpit and sexual parts of women and contract the latter. Know, O Vizier, God be good to you, that bad exhalations from the vulva and from the armpits are, as is also a wide vagina, the greatest of evils. If a woman wants this bad odour to disappear, she must pound red myrrh, then sift it, and knead this powder with myrtle water, and rub her sexual parts with this wash. All disagreeable emanation will disappear from her vulva. Another remedy is obtained by pounding lavender, and kneading it afterwards with musk rose water. Saturate a piece of woolen stuff with it, and rub the vulva with the same until it is hot. The bad smell will be removed by this. If a woman intends to contract her vagina, she has only to dissolve alum in water, and wash her sexual parts in the solution, which may be made still more efficacious by the adding of a little bark of the walnut tree, the latter substance being very astringent. Another remedy to be mentioned is the following, which is well known for its efficacy. Boil water in carobs or locusts, freed from their kernels, and bark of the pomegranate tree. The woman sits in a bath with the decoction thus obtained, which must be as hot as she can bear it. When the bath gets cold, it must be warmed and used again, and this immersion is to be repeated several times. The same result may be obtained by fumigating the vulva with cow dung. To do away with bad smell of armpits, one takes antimony and mastic, which are to be pounded together and put with water into an earthen vase. The mixture is then rubbed against the sides of the vase until it turns red. When it is ready for use, rub it into the armpits, and the bad smell will be removed. It must be used repeatedly until a radical cure is effected. The same result may be arrived at by pounding together antimony or hadida and mastic, setting the mixture afterwards onto a stove over a low fire until it is of the consistency of bread, and rubbing the residue with a stone until the pellicle which will have formed is removed. Then rub it into the armpits, and you may be sure that the bad smell will soon be gone. End of chapter 18. Chapter 19. Instructions with regard to pregnancy, and how the gender of the child that is to be born may be known, that is to say, knowledge of the sex of the fetus. Know, O Vizier, God be good to you, that the certain indications of pregnancy are the following. The dryness of the vulva immediately after coitus, the inclination to stretch herself, accesses of somnolency, heavy and profound sleep, the frequent contraction of the opening of the vulva to such an extent that not even a marud could enter, the nipples of the breast becoming darker, and lastly, the most certain of all marks is the cessation of menstruation. If the woman remains always in good health from the time that her pregnancy is certain, if she preserves the good looks of her face and a clear complexion, if she does not become freckled, then it may be taken as a sign that the child will be a boy. The color of the nipples also points to a child of the male sex. A strong development of the breast, and bleeding from the nose, if it comes from the right nostrils, are signs of the same purport. The signs pointing to conception of a child of the female sex are numerous. I will name them here. Frequent indisposition during pregnancy, pale complexion, spots and freckles, pains in the matrix, frequent nightmares, blackness of the nipples, a heavy bleeding on the left side, nasal hemorrhage on the same side. If there is any doubt about the pregnancy, let the woman drink on going to bed honey water, and if she has a feeling of heaviness in the abdomen, it is a proof that she is with child. If the right side feels heavier than the left one, it will be a boy. If the breasts are swelling with milk, this is similarly a sign that the child she is bearing will be of the male sex. I have received this information from savants, and all the indications are positive and tested. End of chapter 19. End of section 12. Perfumed Garden by Sheikh NEFZAOUI, translated by Richard Burton. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. recording by Alia Makki. Chapter 20. Forming the conclusion of this work, and treating of the good effect of the dilution of eggs as favourable to the coitus. Know, O Vizier, God be good to you, that this chapter contains the most useful instructions how to increase the intensity of the coitus, and that the latter part is profitable to read, for an old man as well as for the man in his best years, and for the young man. The Sheikh, who gives good advice to the creatures of God the Great, the sage, the savant, the first of the men of his time, speaks as follows on this subject. Listen then to his words. He who takes it a practice to eat every day fasting the yolks of eggs without the white part, will find in this aliment an energetic stimulant towards coitus. The same is the case with a man who during 3 days eats of the same mixture with onions. He who boils asparagus and then fries them in fat, and then pours upon them the yolks of eggs with pounded condiments, and eats every day of this dish, will grow very strong for the coitus, and find in it a stimulant for his amorous desires. He who peels onions, puts them into a saucepan with condiments and aromatic substances, and fries the mixture with oil and yolks of eggs, will acquire a surpassing and invaluable vigour for the coitus, if he will partake of this dish for several days. Camel's milk mixed with honey and taken regularly develops a vigour for copulation which is unaccountable, and causes the virile member to be on the alert night and day. He who for several days makes his meals upon eggs boiled with myrrh, coarse cinnamon, and pepper, will find his vigour with respect to coition and erection greatly increased. He will have a feeling as though his member would never return to the state of repose. A man who wishes to copulate during a whole night, and whose desire having come on suddenly will not allow him to prepare himself and follow the regimen just mentioned, may have to recourse to the following recipe. He must get a great number of eggs, so that he may eat to surfeit, and fry them with fresh fat and butter. When done, he immerses them in honey, working the whole mass together. He must then eat of them as much as possible with a little bread, and he may be certain that for the whole night his member will not give him any rest. On this subject the following verses have been composed. The member of Abul Hayluj has remained erect for 30 days without a break, because he did eat onions. Abul Hayja has deflowered in one night once 80 virgins, and he did not eat or drink between, because he surfeited himself first with chickpeas, and had drunk camel's milk with honey mixed. Maymun the negro never ceased to spend his sperm, while he for 50 days without a truce the game was working. How proud was he to finish such a task! For 10 days more he worked it, not was he yet surfeited, but all this time he ate but yolk of eggs and bread. The deeds of Abul Hayluj, Abul Hayja, and Maymun just cited have been justly praised, and their history is truly marvellous. So I will make you acquainted with it, please God, and thus complete the signal services which this work is designed to render to humanity. The history of Zahra. The Sheikh, the protector of religion, God the highest be good to him, records that there lived once in a remote antiquity an illustrious king who had numerous armies and immense riches. This king had 7 daughters, remarkable for their beauty and perfections. These 7 had been born one after another without any male infant between them. The king of the time wanted them in marriage, but they refused to be married. They wore men's clothing, rode on magnificent horses covered with gold embroidered trappings, knew how to handle the sword and the spear, and bore men down in single combat. Each of them possessed a splendid palace with the servants and slaves necessary for such service, for the preparation of meat and drink, and other necessities of that kind. Whenever a marriage offer for one of them was presented to the king, he never failed to consult with her about it, but they always answered, "That shall never be." Different conclusions were drawn from these refusals, some in a good sense, some in a bad one. For a long time no positive information could be gathered of the reason for this conduct, and the daughters persevered in acting in the same manner until the death of their father. Then the oldest of them was called upon to succeed him, and receive the oath of fidelity from all his subjects. This accession to the throne resounded through all the countries. The name of the eldest was Fawz al-Jamal, the flower of beauty. The second was Sultanat al-Aqmar, the queen of the moons. The third Badi'at al-Jamal, the incomparable in beauty. The fourth Al-Warda, the rose. The fifth Mahmuda, the praiseworthy. The sixth Al-Kamila, the perfect. And finally the seventh, Zahra, the beauty. Zahra, the youngest, was at that same time the most intelligent and judicious. She was passionately fond of the chase, and one day as she was riding through the fields, she met on her way a cavalier who saluted her, and she returned his salute. She had some 20 men in her service with her. The cavalier thought it was the voice of a woman he had heard, but Zahra's face was covered by a flap of her haik, and he was not certain, and said to himself, I would like to know whether this is a woman or a man. He asked one of the princess's servants, who dissipated his doubts. Approaching Zahra, he then conversed pleasantly with her until they made a halt for breakfast. He sat down near her to partake of the repast. Disappointing the hopes of the cavalier, the princess did not uncover her face, and, pleading that she was fasting, ate nothing. He could not help admiring secretly her hand, the gracefulness of her waist, and the amorous expression of her eyes. His heart was seized with a violent love. The following conversation took place between them. The cavalier: Is your heart insensible for friendship? Zahra: It is not proper for a man to feel friendship for a woman, for it is their hearts once inclined towards each other, libidinous desires will soon invade them, and with Satan inciting them to do wrong, their fall is soon known by everyone. The cavalier: It is not so, when the affection is true, and their intercourse pure, without infidelity or treachery. Zahra: If a woman gives way to the affection she feels for a man, she becomes an object of slander in the whole world, and of general contempt, whence nothing arises but trouble and regret. The cavalier: But our love will remain secret, and in this retired spot, which may serve us as our place of meeting, we shall have intercourse together unknown to all. Zahra: That may not be. Besides, it could not so easily be done. We should soon be suspected, and the eyes of the whole world would be turned upon us. The cavalier: But love is the source of life, the happiness that is, the meeting, the embraces, the caresses of love, the sacrifice of the fortune, and even of the life for your love. Zahra: These words are impregnated with love, and your smile is seductive, but you would do better to refrain from similar conversation. The cavalier: Your word is emerald, and your counsels are sincere, but love has now taken root in my heart, and no one is able to tear it out. If you drive me away from you, I shall assuredly die. Zahra: For all that you must return to your place and I to mine. If it pleases God, we shall meet again. Then they separated, bidding each other adieu, and returned each of them to their dwelling. The cavalier's name was Abul Hayja. His father, Qairun, was a great merchant and immensely rich, whose habitation stood isolated between the estate of the princess, a day's journey distant from her castle. Abul Hayja returned home, could not rest, and put again his tamur when the night fell, took a black turban, and buckled his sword under his tamur. Then he mounted his horse, and accompanied by his favourite negro Maymun, he rode away secretly under the cover of the night. They travelled all night without stopping, until, on the approach of daylight, the dawn came upon them in sight of Zahra's castle. Then they made a halt among the hills, and entered with their horses into a cavern, which they found there. Abul Hayja left the negro in charge of the horses, and went in the direction of the castle, in order to examine its approaches. He found it surrounded by a very high wall. Not being able to get into it, he retired to some distance to watch those who came out. But the whole day passed away, and he saw no one coming out. After sunset, he sat himself down at the entrance of the cavern, and kept on watch until midnight. Then sleep overcame him. He was lying asleep with his head on Maymun's knee, when the latter suddenly awakened him. What is it? he asked. Oh, my master,
said Maymun.
"I have heard some noise in the cavern, and I saw the glimmer of light." He rose at once, and looking attentively, he perceived indeed a light, towards which he went, and which guided him to a recess in the cavern. Having ordered the negro to wait for him while he was going to find out where it proceeded from, he took his sabre and penetrated deeper into the cavern. He discovered a subterranean vault, into which he descended. The road to it was nearly impracticable, on account of the stones which encumbered it. He contrived, however, after much trouble, to reach a kind of crevice, through which the light shone which he had perceived. Looking through it, he saw the Princess Zahra surrounded by about 100 virgins. They were in a magnificent palace dug out in the heart of the mountain, splendidly furnished and resplendent with gold everywhere. The maidens were eating and drinking and enjoying the pleasures of the table. Abul Hajar said to himself, "Alas, I have no companion to assist me at this difficult moment." Under the influence of this reflection, he returned to his servant Maymun, and said to him, "Go to my brother before God, Abul Hayluj, and tell him to come here to me as quick as he can." The servant forthwith mounted upon his horse, and rode upon the remainder of the night. Of all his friends, Abul Hayluj was the one whom Abul Hayja liked best. He was the son of a vizier. This young man and Abul Hayja and the negro Maymun passed as the three strongest and most fearless men of their time, and no one ever succeeded in overcoming them in combat. When the negro Maymun came to his master's friend, and had told him what had happened, the latter said, "Certainly, we belong to God, and shall return to him." Then he took his sabre, mounted his horse, and taking his favourite negro with him, made his way with Maymun to the cavern. Abul Hayja came out to meet him and bid him welcome, and having informed him of the love he bore for Zahra, he told him of his resolution to penetrate forcibly into the palace, of the circumstances under which he had taken refuge in the cavern, and the marvellous scene he had witnessed while there. Abul Hayluj was dumb with surprise. At nightfall they heard singing, boisterous laughter, and animated talking. Abul Hayja said to his friend, "Go to the end of the subterranean passage and look. You will then make excuse for the love of your brother." Abul Hayluj, stealing softly down to the lower end of the grotto, looked into the interior of the palace, and was enchanted to the sight of these virgins and their charms. "Oh brother," he asked, "which among these women is Zahra?" Abul Hayja answered, "The one with the irreproachable shape, whose smile is irresistible, whose cheeks are roses, and whose forehead is resplendently white, whose head is encircled by a crown of pearls, and whose garments sparkle with gold. She is seated on a throne encrusted with rare stones and nails of silver, and she is leaning her head upon her hind." "I have observed her of all the others," said Abul Hayluj, "as though she were a standard or a blazing torch. But, O my brother, let me draw your attention to a matter which appears not to have struck you." "What is it?" asked Abul Hayja. His friend replied, "It is very certain, O my brother, that licentiousness reigns in this place. Observe that these people come here only at night time, and that this is a retired place. There is every reason to believe that it is exclusively consecrated for feasting, drinking, and debauchery. And if it was your idea that you could have come to her you love by any other way than the one on which we are now, you would have found that you have deceived yourself, even if you had found means to communicate with her by the help of other people." "And why so?" asked Abul Hayja. "Because," said his friend, "as far as I can see, Zahra solicits the affection of young girls, which is a proof that she can have no inclination for men, nor be responsive to their love." "Oh, Abul Hayluj," said Abul Hayja, "I know the value of your judgment, and it is for that I have sent you. You know that I have never hesitated to follow your advice and counsel." "Oh my brother," said the son of the vizier, "if God had not guided you to this entrance of the palace, you would never have been able to approach Zahra. But from here, please God, we can find our way." Next morning at sunrise, they ordered their servants to make a breach in that place, and managed to get everything out of the way that could obstruct the passage. This done, they hid their horses in another cavern, safe from wild beasts and thieves. Then all the four, the two masters and the two servants, entered the cavern and penetrated into the palace, each one of them armed with sabre and buckler. Then they closed up again the breach, and restored its former appearance. Now they found themselves in the darkness, but Abu Hayluj, having struck a match, lighted one of the candles, and they began to explore the palace in every sense. It seemed to them the marvel of marvels. The furniture was magnificent. Everywhere there were beds and couches of all kinds, rich candelabra, splendid lustres, sumptuous carpets, and tables covered with dishes, fruits, and beverages. Then, when they had admired all these treasures, they went on examining the chambers, counting them. There was a great number of them, and in the last one they found a secret door, very small and of appearance, which attracted their attention. Abu Hayluj said, "This is probably the door which communicates with the palace. Come, O my brother, we will wait the things that are to come in one of these chambers." They took their position in a cabinet difficult of access, high up, and from which one could see without being seen. So they waited till night came on. At that moment the secret door opened, giving admission to a negress carrying a torch, who set alight all the lustres and candelabra, and arranged the beds, set the plates, placed all sorts of meats upon the tables, with cups and bottles, and perfumed the air with the sweetest scents. Soon afterwards the maidens made their appearance. Their gait denoted in the same time indifference and languor. They seated themselves upon the divans, and the negress offered them meat and drink. They ate, drank, and sang melodiously. Then the four men, seeing them giddy with wine, came down from their hiding places with their sabres in their hands, brandishing them over the heads of the maidens. They had first taken care to veil their faces with the upper part of their haik. "Who are these men," cried Zuhra, "who are invading our dwelling under the cover of the shades of the night? Have you risen out of the ground, or did you descend from the sky, and what do you want?" "Coition," they answered. "With whom?" asked Zuhra. "With you, O apple of my eye," said Abu Hayja, advancing. Zahra said, "Who are you?" "I am Abu Hayja." "But how is it that you know me?" "It is I who met you while out hunting at such and such a place." "But what brought you hither?" "The will of God the Highest." At this answer Zahra was silent, and set herself to think of a means by which she could rid herself of these intruders. Now, among the virgins that were present there were several whose vulvas were like iron barred, and whom no one had been able to deflower. There was also present a woman called Muna, she who appeases the passion, who was insatiable as regard to coition. Zahra thought to herself, "It is only by stratagem I can get rid of these men. By means of these women I will set them tasks which they will be unable to accomplish as conditions for my consent." Then turning to Abu Hayja, she said to him, "You will not get possession of me unless you fulfill the conditions which I shall impose upon you." The four cavaliers at once consented to this without knowing them, and she continued, "But if you do not fulfill them, will you pledge your word that you will be my prisoners, and place yourself entirely at my disposition?" "We pledge our words," they answered. She made them take their oath that they would be faithful to their word, and then placing her hand in that of Abu Hayja, she said to him, "As regards to you, I impose upon you the task of deflowering 80 virgins without ejaculating. Such is my will." He answered, "I accept." She let him then enter a chamber where there were several kinds of beds, and sent to him the 80 virgins in succession. Abu Hayja deflowered them all, and so ravished in a single night the maidenhood of 80 young girls without ejaculating the smallest drop of sperm. This extraordinary vigour filled Zahra with astonishment, and likewise all those who were present. The princess, turning then to the negro Maymun, asked, "And this one, what is his name?" They said, "Maymun." "Your task shall be," said the princess, pointing to Muna, "to do this woman's business without resting for 50 consecutive days. You need not ejaculate unless you like, but if the excess of fatigue forces you to stop, you will not have fulfilled your obligation." They all cried out at the hardness of such a task, but Maymun protested, and said, "I accept the condition, and I shall come out of it with honour." The fact was that this negro had an insatiable appetite for the coitus. Zahra told him to go with Muna to her chamber, impressing upon the latter to let her know if the negro should exhibit the slightest trace of fatigue. "And you," "What is your name?" she asked the friend of Abu al-Hayja. "Abu al-Hayluj," he replied.
Well then, Abu Hayluj,
What I require of you is to remain here in the presence of these women and virgins for 50 consecutive days, with your member during this period always in erection during day and night." And she said to the fourth, "What is your name?" "Fillah," good fortune, was his answer. "Very well, Fillah," she said, "you will remain at our disposition for any services which we may have to demand of you." However, Zahra, in order to leave no motive for any excuse, and so that she might not be accused of bad faith, had asked them, first of all, what regiment they wished to follow during the period of their trial. Abu al-Hayja had asked only for one drink, excepting water, camel's milk with honey, and for nourishment chickpeas cooked with meat and abundance of onions. And by means of these aliments he did, by the permission of God, accomplish his remarkable exploit. Abu al-Hayluj demanded for his nourishment onions cooked with meat, and for drink the juice pressed out of pounded onions mixed with honey. Maymun, on his part, asked for yolks of eggs and bread. However, Abu al-Hayja claimed of Zuhra the favour of copulating with her on the strength of the fact that he had fulfilled his engagement. She answered him, "Oh, impossible! The condition which you have fulfilled is inseparable from those which your companions have to comply with. The agreement must be carried out in its entirety, and you will find me true to my promise. But if one amongst you should fail in his task, you will all be my prisoners by the will of God." Abu al-Hayja gave way in the face of this firm resolve, and sat amongst the girls and women, and ate and drank with them, whilst waiting for the conclusion of the tasks of his companions. At first, Zahra, feeling convinced that they would soon all be at her mercy, was all amiability and smiles. But when the 20th day had come, she began to show signs of distress, and on the 30th she could no longer restrain her tears. For on that day Abu al-Hayluj had finished his task, and having come out of it honourably, he took his seat by the side of his friend amongst the company, who continued to eat tranquilly and to drink abundantly. From that time the princess, who had now no other hope than in the failure of the negro Maymun, relied upon his becoming fatigued before he finished his work. She sent every day to Muna for information, who sent word that the negro's vigour was constantly increasing, and she began to despair, seeing already Abu al-Hayja and Abu al-Hayluj coming off as victors in their enterprises. One day she said to the two friends, "I have made inquiries about the negro, and Muna has let me know that he is exhausted with fatigue." At these words Abu al-Hayja cried, "In the name of God, if he does not carry out his task, aye, and if he does not go beyond it for 10 days longer, he shall die the vilest of deaths." But his zealous servant never during the period of 50 days took any rest in his work of copulation, and kept going on, besides, for 10 days longer, as ordered by his master. Muna, on her part, had the greatest satisfaction, as this feat had at last appeased her ardour for coition. Maymun, having remained victor, could then take his seat with his companions. Then said Abu al-Hayja to Zuhra, "See, we have fulfilled all the conditions you have imposed upon us. It is now for you to accord me the favours which, according to our agreement, were to be the price if we succeeded." "But it is too true," answered the princess, and she gave herself up to him, and he found her excelling the most excellent. As to the negro Maymun, he married Muna. Abu al-Hayluj chose amongst all the virgins the one he had found the most attractive. They all remained in the palace, giving themselves up to good cheer and all possible pleasures, until death put an end to their happy existence and dissolved their union. God be merciful to them as well as to all Muslimans. Amen. It is to this stop that the verses cited previously make allusion. I have given it here because it testifies to the efficacy of the dishes and the remedies, the use of which I have recommended for giving vigour for coition, and all learned men agree in acknowledging their salutary effects. There are still other beverages of excellent virtue. I will describe the following. Take 1 part of the juice pressed out of pounded onions, and mix it with 2 parts of purified honey.
Heat the mixture over a fire until the onion juice has disappeared and the honey only remains. Then take the residue from the fire, let it get cool, and preserve it for use when wanted. Then mix the same 1 awqiyah with 3 awaq of water, and let chickpeas be macerated in this fluid for 1 day and 1 night. This beverage is to be partaken of during winter and on going to bed. Only a small quantity is to be taken, and only for 1 day. The member of him who has drunk of it will not give him much rest during the night that follows. As to the man who partakes of it for several consecutive days, he will constantly have his member rigid and upright without intermission. A man with an ardent temperament ought not to make use of it, as it may give him a fever. Nor should the medicine be used 3 days in succession, except by old or cold-tempered men. And lastly, it should not be resorted to in the summer. I certainly did wrong to put this book together, but you will pardon me, nor let me pray in vain. O God, award no punishment for this on Judgment Day, and thou, O reader, hear me conjure thee to say, so be it. Section 13.
Of the Perfumed Garden by Sheikh NEFZAOUI, translated by Richard Burton. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Alia, Makki. Appendix to the autograph edition. To the Reader. In the year of grace 1876, some amateurs who were passionately fond of Arabian literature combined for the purpose of reproducing by autographic process a number of copies of a French translation of a work written by the Shaykh NEFZAOUI, which book had, by a lucky chance, fallen into their hands. Each brought to the undertaking such assistance as his special knowledge allowed, and it was thus that the tedious work was achieved by amateurs amidst obstacles which were calculated to abate the ardour of their enthusiasm. Thus, as the reader has doubtlessly already divined, it was not an individual but a concourse of individuals who, taking advantage of a union of favourable circumstances and facilities not of common occurrence, offered to their friends the first fruit of a work, interesting and of such rarity that to the present time very few had had the opportunity of reading it, while they could only gather their knowledge from incorrect manuscripts, unsophisticated copies, and incomplete translations. It is to this association of efforts, guided by the principle of the division of labour for the airing out of a great undertaking, that the appearance of this book is due. The editor (it is under this name that the Society J.M.P.Q. has been, is, and will be designated) is assured beforehand, notwithstanding the imperfection of his production, of the sympathies of his readers, who are all friends of his, or friends of his friends, and for whose benefit he has worked. For this reason he is not going to claim an indulgence which has been already extended to him. His wish is only to make clear to everybody the exact value and nature of the book which he is offering, and to make known on what foundations the work has been done, in how far the remarkable translation of M has been respected, and in short, what reliance may be placed in the title, translated from Arabic by M, Staff Officer. It is in fact important that there should be no misunderstanding on this point, and that the reader should not imagine that he holds an exact copy of that translation in his hands, for we confess that we have modified it, and we give these explanations in order to justify the alterations which were imposed by the attending circumstances. As far as we are aware, there have been made now only two proper translations of the work of Shaykh NEFZAOUI. One, of which we have availed ourselves, is due, as is well known, to M, a fanatical and distinguished Arabophile. The other is the work of Dr. L. The latter we have never seen. A learned expounder commenced the translation, which promised to leave the others far behind. Unfortunately, death interrupted the accomplishment of this work, and there was no one to continue it. Our intention at the outset was to reproduce simply the first of the forenamed translations, making, however, such rectifications as were necessitated by gross mistakes in the orthography and in the French idiom by which the manuscript in our possession was disfigured. Our views did not go beyond that, but we had scarcely made any progress with the book when we found that it was impossible to keep the translation as it stood. Obvious omissions, mistaken renderings of the senses, originating no doubt with the faulty Arab text which the translator had at his disposal, and which were patent at first sight, imposed upon us the necessity of consulting other resources. We were thus induced to examine all the Arab manuscripts of the work which we could by any possibility obtain. Three texts were to this end put under contribution. These treated of the same subjects in the same order, and presented the same succession of chapters, corresponding, however, in this respect, point by point, with the manuscript upon which our translator had to work. But while two of them gave a kind of abstract of the questions treated, the third, on the contrary, seemed to enlarge at pleasure upon every subject. We shall expatiate to some slight extent upon this last named text, since the study of it has enabled us to clear up a certain number of points upon which M, notwithstanding his conscientious researches, have been unable to throw sufficient light. The principal characteristics of this text, which is not exempt from gross mistakes, is the affectations of more cares as to style and the choice of expressions. It enters more into fastidious and frequently technical particulars, contains more quotations of verses, often be it marked inapplicable ones, and uses in certain circumstances filthy images, which seem to have had a particular attraction for the author. But as a compensation for these faults, it gives, instead of cold dry explications, pictures which are often charming, wanting neither in poetry nor originality, nor in descriptive talent, nor even in a certain elevation of thought, and bearing an undeniable stamp of originality. We may cite as an example of the chapter of kisses, which is found neither in our translation nor in the other two texts which we have examined, and which we have borrowed. In our character as Gauls, we must not complain about the obscenities which are scattered about, as if on purpose to excite the grosser passions. But what we must deprecate are the tedious expansions, whole pages of verbiage, which disfigure the work, and are like the reverse of the medal. The author has felt this himself. As the conclusion of his work, he requested the reader to pardon him in consideration of the good intention which has guided his pen. In presence of the qualities of first rank which must be acknowledged to exist in a book, we should have preferred that it had not contained these defects. We should have liked, in one word, to see it more homogeneous and more earnest, and more particularly so if one considers that the circumstances which we are pointing out raise doubts as to the veritable origin of the new matters which have been discovered, and which might easily be taken for interpolations due to the fancy of one or more of the copyists, through whose hands the work passed before we received it. Everyone knows, in fact, the grave inconveniences attaching to manuscripts, and the services rendered by the art of printing to science and literature by disposing of them. No copy leaves the hands of the copyist complete and perfect, particularly if the writer is an Arab, the least scrupulous of all. The Arab copyist not only involuntarily scatters about mistakes which are due to his ignorance and carelessness, but will not shrink from making corrections, modifications, and even additions according to his fancy. The literary reader himself, carried away by the charm of the subject, often annotates the text in the margin, inserts an anecdote or idea which is just current, or some puffed up medical recipe. All this, to the great detriment of its purity, finds its way into the body of the work through the hands of the next copyist. There is no doubt that the work of Shaykh NEFZAOUI has suffered in this way. Our three texts, and the one upon which the translator worked, offer striking dissimilarities and of all kinds.
although, by the way, one of the translations seemed to approach more nearly in style to the extended text of which we have spoken. But a question of another sort comes before us with that respect, which contains more than 4 times as much matter as the others. Is this the entire work of the Shaykh NEFZAOUI, always bearing in mind the modification to which manuscripts are exposed, and does it so stand by itself as a work for the perusal of voluptuaries, while the others are only abridged copies for the use of the vulgar, serving them as an elementary treatise? Or might it not be the product of numerous successive additions to the original work, by which, as we have already suggested, its bulk has been considerably increased? We have no hesitation in pronouncing in favour of the first of these hypotheses. In the record which the Sheikh gives of it, he says that this is the second work of the kind which he has composed, and that it is in fact only the first one, entitled The Torch of the World, considerably increased pursuance of the advice given him by the Vizier Muhammad Awan al-Zawawi. Might it not be possible that a third work, still more complete than the second, had been the outcome of the new studies of the author? Subjects of a particular speciality have certainly been treated in the work of which we speak. In looking at the notes which serve as a preface to this translation, we find reproaches addressed by the translator to the author because he has merely hinted at 2 questions of more than ordinary interest, viz. tribady and paiderasty. Well, then the Shaykh would meet his critic triumphantly by appearing before him with the work in question. For the chapter, which constitutes by itself more than half of its volume, is the 21st, and bears the superscription, "The 21st and the last chapter of the book, treating of the utility of eggs and some other substances which favour coitus, of tribady and the women who first conceived this description of voluptuousness, of paiderasty and matters concerned with it, of procuresses and the sundry ruses by which one may get possession of a woman, of facility, jokes, anecdotes, and several questions concerning coitus in general." What would be the surprise of the translator to find a community of views and sentiments existing between himself, a representative of modern civilization, and this Arab who lived more than 300 years ago? He would only express his regret for having entertained so bad an opinion of his master, for having believed for one moment in an omission on his part, and for having doubted his competency to deal with the various questions spoken of. Does not the discovery of a text so complete authorize us to admit the existence of 2 works, one elementary, the other learned? And might it not be a reason of a little remnant of bashfulness that the author has reserved for the 20th chapter, without any previous allusions, the remarkable subjects which we do not find hinted at in any other place? To put a question in this fashion is at the same time to solve it, and to solve it in the affirmative. That interminable chapter would not be a product of interpolations. It is too long and too serious a work to admit such a supposition. The little that we have seen of it seems to bear the stamp of a well pronounced originality, and to be composed with too much method not to be the work, and entirely the work, of the master. One may be surprised that this text is so rare, but the answer is very simple. As the translator judiciously observes in his notice, the matters treated in the 21st chapter are of nature to startle many people. See, an Arab who practises in secret paiderasty affects in public rigid and austere manners, while he discusses without constraint in his conversation everything that concerns the natural coitus. Thus you will easily understand that he would not wish to be suspected of reading such a book, by which his reputation would be compromised in the eyes of his co-religionists, while he would without hesitation exhibit a book which treated of the coitus only. Another consideration, moreover, suffices completely to explain the rarity of the work. Its compass makes it very expensive, and the manuscript is not attainable by everybody on account of the high price it reaches. However it may be, as regards to the origin of the text, having the 3 documents in our possession, we have given careful revision to the translation of M. Each doubtful point has been the object of minute research, and has been generally cleared up by one or the other.
When there were several acceptable versions, we chose that which was the most fit for the context, and many mutilated passages were restored. Nor were we afraid to make additions in borrowing from the extended text what appeared to us worthy of reproduction, and for the omission of which we should have been blamed by the reader. We were careful, however, not to overload the work, and to introduce no new matter which would militate against the peculiar character of the original translation. It is partly for this last reason, and still more so because the work required for this undertaking surpassed our strength, that we could not bring to light, to our great regret, the treasures concealed in the 21st chapter, as well as a certain number of new tales not less acceptable than those which we have given, with which we have enriched the text. We must not conceal that, leaving out of sight these alterations, we have not scrupled to refine the phrases, round off the periods, correct the phraseology, and in short, to amend even the form of the translation, which in many instances left much to be desired. It was a matter of necessity that the perusal of the contents of the book should be made agreeable. Now the translator, with the most praiseworthy intentions, had been too anxious to render the Arabic text, with its short jumbled sentences, as clear as possible, and had thus made the reading painfully laborious. Looking at some passages, it may even be supposed that he had only jotted them down, particularly towards the end, and had not been able, for some reason or other, to revise them until it was too late. The new matter introduced has compelled us to make modifications in the notes of the translator, and to add new notes for the better elucidation of the subjects which had not been treated before. We have been, with respect to these notes, as careful as we were with respect to the text, endeavouring to respect as much as possible the personal work of the translator. Now that the reader has all the necessary information about the French edition of the Shaykh NEFZAOUI's work, he will permit us to make, in conclusion, a few remarks upon the ensemble of the book. There are found in it many passages which are not attractive. The extraordinary ideas displayed, for instance those about medicines and concerning the meanings of dreams, clash too directly with modern thought, not to awaken the reader a feeling more of boredom than of pleasure. The work certainly encumbered with a quantity of matter which cannot but appear ridiculous in the eyes of the civilized modern reader, but we should not have been justified in weeding it out. We were bound to keep it as intact as we have received it from our translator. We have held with the Italian proverb traduttore traditore, that a work loses sufficient of its originality by being conveyed from its own tongue into another, and we hope that the plan we have adopted will meet with general approval. Those oddities are, moreover, instructive, as they make us acquainted with the manner and the character of the Arab under a peculiar aspect, and not only of the Arab who was contemporary with our author, but also the Arab of our own day. The latter is, in fact, not much more advanced than was the former. Although our contact with the race becomes closer every day in Tunis, Morocco, Egypt, and other Mussulman countries, they hold to their old medical prescriptions, have the same belief in divination, and honour the same mass of ridiculous notions, in which sorcery and amulets play a large part, and which appear to us supremely absurd. At the same time, one may observe from the very passages which we here refer to, that this people was not so averse as one might believe to witticism, for the pun calembour occupies an important position in the explanation of dreams, which the author has studied the chapters on the sexual organs, apparently for no particular reason, but no doubt with that idea that no matter of interest should be absent from his work. The reader will perhaps also find that probability is frequently sacrificed to imagination. This is a distinctive mark in Arabic literature, and our work could not otherwise but exhibit the faults inherent in the genius of this race, which revels in the love for the marvellous, and amongst whose chief literary productions are to be counted the Thousand and One Nights. But if these tales show such defaults very glaringly, they exhibit, on the other hand, charming qualities, simplicity, grace, delicacy, a mine of precious things which has been explored and made use of by many modern authors. We have pointed out in some notes the relationship which we found between these tales and those of Boccaccio and La Fontaine, but we could not draw attention to all. We had to pass over many with silence, and amongst them of the most striking, as for instance the case of the man expert in stratagems duped by his wife, which we found reproduced with all the perfect mastership of Balzac at the end of La physiologie du mourage. We will not pursue this sketch any further. If instead of commencing the book with a preface we have preferred to address the reader at the end, this was done in order not to impose our views upon him, and thus to stand between him and the work. Whether these additional lines will be read by him or not, we believe we have done our duty by informing him of the direction we gave to our work. We tried, on one hand, to prove the merits of the translator who furnished the basis of our labours, that is to say, the part which required the most science and duty; while on the other hand, we desired our readers to know in how far his translation had to be recast. To the Arabophile who would wish to produce a better translation, the way is left open, and in perfecting the work he is free to uncover the unknown beauties of the 21st chapter to his admiring contemporaries.
End of section 14. End of The Perfumed Garden. Thank you for listening.